Did we take the wrong gate? Thera muttered as they passed through, seeing the strange view beyond. It was a question Ben was asking himself as well, even though he knew it couldn't be the case. It was clearly marked before they went in, something he couldn't have missed, but still he couldn't help but wonder if there'd been some sort of mistake. The last time they'd been through, the entrance had led into what had seemed like a pretty standard forest, strangely lacking in animal life before they got to the town in its depths. But that was about it. Now though, they were both being confronted with a far more alien environment. All of the trees that had stood there in the past, looking like strong, ancient things, had vanished, leaving the area as if they'd never been there, while in their place they'd been substituted with something that looked far more foreign. With the shape of prickly cacti and giant succulents, strange new plants were stretching into the sky, all larger than he'd have any hope of wrapping his arms around, nor would he want to. Giant thorns were jutting out of them all, and bearing a distinctly blue color. He didn't want to make any bets on how poisonous they might be, even with his resistance to such a thing. Stranger than that, though, was what seemed to be making its home in that unusual new land. Mushrooms and other fungi-like beings, not bound to the earth or plants around, but instead wandering on mycelium legs, creeping silently through the thorns before digging into the trunks around, slowly feasting on the present life in their own strange way. He knew there were plenty of life forms and sceneries that would look distinctly alien to his earthling sensibilities on the world he now called home, and he'd seen a few in the past. But what was before him now was pushing it to a whole new extreme as he tried to take it all in and make sense of it before Funa moved to explain. There's probably been 1 or 2 ecosystem collapses since the last time you were both here, the Dark Spirit told them. Some say you never walk through the same land twice, but that's doubly true for this place. Dad's told me before, but it really isn't the same as seeing it with my own eyes. Thera spoke, completely captivated as she looked around despite her misgivings being there. And I'm definitely going to need more context, Ben asked, doing his best not to get pricked while they walked. Thus time it was Lux who explained, her affinity having the closest similarities to life as she took her own interest in what had formed around them. Overwhelming levels of life mana promote growth and change, and at the amount you'd find here, it's at an unsustainable level. An ecosystem will rapidly grow and adapt until it breaks down after a few months or years, only for something else to take its place. It's a constant cycle, though admittedly interesting every time. There really is no way to know what will grow or how it will change the location. It makes it worthwhile to poke your head through the gate every now and then, so long as you aren't particularly sensitive to the mana. Wait, so you're talking mass extinctions as often as every few months of life that never existed before? That's right. It's beautiful in a tragic sort of way. Tragic was putting it bluntly, at least as far as Ben was concerned. Of all of the crafting paths he practiced, alchemy was one, and an important one too. It led to the advent of his strengthening potions, and its applications with smithing let him place more powerful enchantments on the things he would make before they would break under the magical strain. The very idea that so many creatures and new branches of life would die out before they could be properly studied genuinely hurt to hear. In the thousands of years of races joining the world, how many panacea and elixirs could have been made from the things that got to enjoy their short lives in the valley, if they'd only been discovered in time? Of course, I guess you could say the same thing about 1,000 lost worlds too. He sighed to himself. Basically none of them were technologically advanced global civilizations before being conquered. There were bound to be hundreds or thousands of magic secrets just waiting to be discovered that are lost forever now. Okay, going to stop thinking about this, it's just going to bum me out. If they weren't all dead in a couple years, he resolved to put some of his money towards building a whole new research institute for studying and preserving seeds and samples of the things that would appear in the Life Valley to see if anything extraordinary ever popped up. But that was a future concern. He'd come for a completely different purpose. And as they broke through the strange forest, they saw the same Castle Vividus had the last time they were there and made their way toward it, going through the town as they did. Like the last time they visited, the land was filled with a mix of races, as Ben couldn't help but wonder if any of them had been changed by the life magic they would give off too. Seeing a diversity in body plans that seemed to be a bit more than he would expect of any typical mixed breed groups, while Thera dealt with a different bit of attention. Life affinitied fairies. each no bigger than a hand despite their human-like shapes, and one of the 3 mana-based groups that existed in the world were swarming her in a way they hadn't during their first visit, landing on her shoulders and playing with her hair, buzzing around and laughing as they each tried to talk to her. All while she just looked more and more lost as Funa chuckled. Now that your magic's awakened, they can feel the life mana in you a lot more now than they ever would have in the past, so it's drawing them in. You probably look like a giant fairy in their eyes. If you're having trouble with this, then I don't know how you'll manage if you ever meet any dark or earth ones. They'll go wild for you. Oh, well, hello. I'm not a fairy, but it's nice to meet you all, she told them gently, holding out a hand as she would for any spirit and feeling them land along her arm to rub up against her. They aren't going to be charmed, are they? No, all the mana-based have resistances similar to spirits. With how little you're putting out with your brace on, they'll be fine. Okay, good. She gently rubbed the cheek of one that was nestling against her thumb, captivated by their cute appearance before turning to Ben, feeling his eyes on her. What? Fairy princess. I'll kill you. He held in his laughter, settling for enjoying the intense grin stretched across his face as she did her best not to react, lest she disturb all of the fairies that were comfortable clinging to her before they finally arrived at their destination, with Lux gesturing at the fairies before they made themselves known. Now, children, we'll be having a bit of a talk, so we'll have to play another time, she told them, motes of light coming from her fingertips and luring them away as they waved their goodbyes. The entire exchange had been unexpected yet nice, exactly what they needed before knocking on Vivudis's door. Since it was Ben who was coming with a request, it was he who reached out to do it, stopping only as it opened itself, the great life spirit already behind it, looking at them all curiously. Well, I can't say this was really unexpected. Rather, I'm surprised you didn't get here sooner, she said, tapping her cheek and eyeing Thera. Though I wasn't expecting you to as well. The moment she opened the door, Ben couldn't help but be distracted by one thing: the sounds of screams from somewhere within the mansion. It was quiet, subtle even, but it was there, and undoubtedly due to a single source. Ibaru and the rest who had been knowingly involved with his project had been gathered, and he knew the spirits had been the ones to decide their fate, not giving room for any other race to voice an objection. He'd thought that had meant that they'd been killed, possibly tortured first, but if what he was hearing was any indication, they still weren't being allowed to rest. He didn't feel bad for them. As far as he was concerned, they deserved whatever they got, but it did make one thing stand out in his mind. Even if he hadn't known, he'd had his own role in the death of so many spirits, yet had still let himself get used to the acceptance of those around him that he wasn't to blame. Now, though, standing before the one who seemed to be carrying out the punishment of the involved parties, he couldn't help but feel his gut tighten thinking about just who he was looking to ask a favor. Someone who'd been willing to kill him before they had a reason nearly as strong as what they currently did. I think my greed might have begun trumping my survival instincts at a certain point. I wonder when that started? He ignored his god, instead focusing on Vivudis before him, who for her part wasn't giving him a glance. Her entire attention was being directed at Lux and Funa, giving off an air of amusement as she did, while the 2 others looked at her in silence until Lux was finally about to break it with a single word. How? Why Lux? I really feel like I shouldn't have to explain the details to you of all people, should I? She asked back, a thin smile expertly created across the mana she was shaping to act as a face. The details are as simple as you'd expect. But when? We saw you just dash. Only 2 weeks, don't act so surprised. After a rather pleasant evening dealing with the murderer and his cohort that led to a breakthrough in my work, I was in a rather good mood and things just went from there. Empty skies, you've really done it, haven't you? Funa spat out. And to fight of all things? Why is it that every time I see you I'm forced to ask myself how the great life spirit values it so little? Life is loss and change, she told them, not blinking in her attitude. Besides, it seems like only one of the other 3 will have a remote chance of being any use in the time frame we're on. What's the harm in making a 4th? Lux looked at her with narrow eyes. What do you mean, other 3? What? Do you really not know? Vivudis asked in return, the calm confidence slipping as she let herself laugh. Really? You should at least try to keep up with family a bit more, Lux. The area grew thick with mana, a subconscious release that came with the Great Spirit's desire to come to blows, with both Lux and Funa doing their best to hold back despite themselves. Forcing Thera to do something she didn't want to. She stepped in. So why exactly were you expecting us, Viv? She questioned, not asking just what they were talking about for fear it would make things boil over. The Great Spirits were beings who could each individually hold back a gate by themselves. A fight between them with herself and Ben, not to mention an entire town so close by, could only be disastrous. This time it was Vividus's turn to look confused, focusing in on Thera and ignoring the moods of the other two. Did you not come to properly train under me again? You're a saintess now, are you not? It would be a waste if you didn't. The words weren't meant to be harmful, but Thera looked as if she'd taken massive mental damage hearing them. How do you know about that? Word goes around. A mortal matching your description with seemingly unlimited mana healing as many as they could after the battle. It's not surprising you would get the title, nor that there'd be people talking about you. Of course, I suppose you do live rather out in the middle of nowhere, don't you? News must not have made it that far yet. Hearing that left her wanting to collapse to the ground. The thought of anyone in Stonewall ever hearing anything about that enough to give her a migraine while her aunt continued to look at her in confusion. So if you aren't here to improve, what exactly are you here for? Homunculi, Funa told her, trying her best to keep under control. Ben was looking to acquire some, and we wanted to make sure you wouldn't do anything rash again if you were left unsupervised. Of course, I suppose from the look of things you probably don't have the mana to spare right now. I'm not so weakened that I couldn't make one, she told them, sounding thoroughly offended by the thought before looking at him. What characteristics do you need it to have then? Any particular cross you're looking for or traits you desire? Honestly, if you just make it as close to me as possible, then that will work fine. Is that all? If you're just looking for soulless clones, then that's even easier. Give me just a moment and I'll have 4. It seemed the doubts of the other two spirits stroked her drive as she reached out, grabbing Ben's arm and running her mana through it, causing a bead of his flesh to bud off of him while he watched in horror. Seeing that was actually worse than getting stabbed a few times. Nobody acknowledged his grumblings, instead watching Vividus as she dropped the living bead on the ground, spending her mana as it moved to devour the plant matter around it, growing bigger and bigger as it left a barren area in its wake before it split into 4, each on continuing to grow with each passing minute as distinct features began to form. Slowly they shifted into small heads, growing eyes and mouths to aid in their quest for nutrients, but before long they were sprouting a proper torso and limbs, continuing to eat to gain whatever mass they could in a horrifying display of the 4 Bens shoveling grass and dirt into their mouths, all just to grow. It wasn't an instantaneous process, taking over 10 minutes, but nobody could take their eyes away from it as it was happening. The horror of it was too visceral to look away until it was finally done, for perfect copies of him standing there with Vividus speaking proudly at the end of it. Even if my mana is a little tight at the moment, this much is nothing, she proclaimed, drawing eyes back to her and getting a wholly different reaction. Aunt Viv, what the hell happened to your arm? Thera hadn't meant to yell it, but the shock was too great. Vividus typically took a form resembling a succubus as so many of the other great spirits did, following her father's suit, but in the few minutes it took to cast her spell, one of her limbs had vanished, a fact that she seemed content to shrug off. I already said my mana was tight, this was just the cost of it. Don't tell me you're worried, child. She laughed, getting a huff in return. I wouldn't waste it on you. Ah well, I suppose you'll be here a while anyway since you'll need to be taught how to properly use one of these, so come in already. That won't be necessary, Ben told her, walking close to the homunculi and reaching out with his deep connection, filling each with his soul to guide them as he dug through his bag to hand out clothing, letting the life spirit watch as they moved under his command, all 4 getting dressed before turning to bow to her and speaking in one voice. Thanks a lot though. Really appreciate this. It was only then that she really looked taken aback during the entire encounter, still watching in surprise as they turned to go back to the gate now that their goal had been met. So Aunt Lux, Aunt Funa, what was all of that about back at the beginning? Thera asked, bringing up the question that Ben found himself deeply curious about as well, only to get shakes of their heads as Lux ran her fingers through Thera's hair. "Don't worry about it, sweetheart. It will only stress you out. Gods above, it's already stressing me out." "We'll have to talk to Abris," Funa agreed. "And when she said it must be Dash." "It has to be him," Lux muttered. "Just what is that idiot up to now? Was that why he's been missing this whole time? Why, when I find him I'm going to—" She trailed off, focusing back on Thera and Ben, as well as how they were only being made more and more curious with each word, before dropping the topic entirely for a different one. "But let's not worry about that right now. Ben, how are the homunculi working out for you?" "So far, so good. I can't do everything I was hoping with them, but they're more than good enough for my purposes." He could feel the world through their senses, see through their eyes, hear with their ears and touch with their hands, same as if they were his own body, though moving them still took a bit more mental work. Normally, nothing really required much in the way of conscious thought, but for them, he needed to be aware of how he was directing each movement. It felt smoother and more natural than it had any time he connected to something with a shape completely foreign to him. But as things stood, he'd still need to practice for them to truly become extensions of himself. Which isn't bad. I've got my puppetry skill that I'm sure to level up a bit from this, so it will only get easier, and I already have ideas for raising it. The bigger disappointment is that I can't cast magic through them. I mean, it's not the biggest deal in the world since they have to be within a couple of feet of me. But that means anything I make with them will need to be enchanted by my real body. Oh well, that just leaves the physical me focusing on my magics while I can use these to practice my other skills. And he already had a few ideas on how to do just that. After all, when he was going to be busy helping others awaken, he now had 4 other bodies to put to use and all 10 of his fists clenched in anticipation. Things were about to get exciting, he could feel it. "Hey Thera," he sang out, harmonizing with his 4 clones as she immediately took a turn to the suspicious. "I would like to point out before you say anything that I just dealt with my least favorite relative for you. I'm not asking anything bad, I swear. I was just hoping you'd make me some iron." She didn't immediately trust him, the feeling that he was up to something too great when there were 5 of him trying to suck up. But she did as he asked, forcing mana to bend to her will and watching as it changed to metal, a small boulder of it appearing on the ground before her that Ben was quick to get his hands on. Running his own personal power through it, he broke it up into 5 equal parts before shaping each into a chest, reaching into his bag at the end to get some of his rainbow mana batteries to set into them before he began enchanting. "Okay. I'll bite. What are you doing?" Thera asked as she watched, not immediately understanding what the point of any of that was as he began his work. "I need a place to store my clones when I'm not using them." "Wait, so you're gonna toss them into some metal crates?" "Ben, even if they're not ensouled, they are alive. They need at least a little bit of care unless you're gonna make me heal them all of the time." "I won't, and they'll get it, don't worry. This is just a cost-saving measure." He connected to his rings as he built up the enchantment on each, not needing anything overly complicated, just wanting it to fulfill a relatively simple thing, even if the degree he'd be doing it at was rarely seen. He was manipulating the flow of time when it was sealed, making it come to as close to a standstill as could be done. Time was an interesting magic to work with, if partly due to the limits of it. Despite its name, the magic could only really work in one direction, with backwards time travel being impossible. Despite that though, it was possible to drop the speed to nearly nothing if an enchanter had the skill and power for it, which was exactly what he wanted. If they're in a slower time when they aren't being used, then they won't need to be fed as often to keep them alive, and they should stay in good condition longer since they basically won't be aging while in there. It's the most efficient way of taking care of them. It was a purely rational way of treating them, an idea that suited his practicality, though to Thera it still sat funny in her thoughts. Even if it was true, she couldn't help but feel weird seeing anything that looked just like him being shoved into a hard metal box until they were needed, but she knew that wasn't a real argument against it when they wouldn't even feel anything unless he was using them. "Just put a pillow under them or something at least, will you? My neck hurts just looking at this." "All right, but later. After all, we're burning daylight and we still have a big beautiful library left to explore. Gotta test these bad boys out to see what they can do." But first you're going to need to convince the librarians that they should be allowed to go up the higher floors with you despite not having any sort of identification. Did not consider that. Yeah, it might be a problem. You think I could convince Yuliel or Vasta to write me a note? Getting both the Archmage and non-affinity mage's agreement to help had ended up being the easy part after he explained just what he'd done. After fielding their questions and dealing with Jake poking or prodding, they had to manage the harder bit, convincing the librarians. He would have never expected it to be a job that was taken as seriously as they made it out to be. But then, they belonged to one of the most prestigious magical libraries in the world, so he cut them some slack as he moved to prove himself, given them orders without saying a word, proving he could see through the eyes of others and doing his best to convince them that they weren't seeing members of his race trying to slip in, only living tools. In the end, he still wasn't sure if he really managed to make them believe it as much as the two mages present had. After all, they were the ones who got him access to the third floor to begin with. If the homunculi really were individual people who they would go so far as to lie for, it would have made far more sense to just get them to do the same thing again. Oh well, it's done and I'm here, so who cares? It all worked out in the end. He told himself as he got to where he'd left off at the shelves the other day, pulling out 100 books with his magic to float before all of their eyes with the sounds of paper becoming even more noticeable than it had been before. Not that he cared. He was already lost in how well his idea was working out. Before I was reading about 4,000 books an hour, with this I should be able to do 20. Now the limit was his mana instead of his eyes. But he didn't care. It would grow with time. But as he read thousands of pages through 5 pairs of eyes, he didn't think there was any way he could look at what he was doing and say it still wasn't enough, even if he couldn't keep himself from imagining the possibilities for his crafting with just a couple more clones in his hands. Well, tell them not to watch then. Geez, I'm not some sideshow. Can you blame me? If I get some more bodies to use, then I might be able to read everything here in my lifetime, along with everything else I'm hoping to do. Of course, I probably couldn't manage more books than this with my magic. I'm already at a bit of a loss, so I'll need to either raise my regen or my level if I want to go beyond this. Well, I have too much to do to waste a year reading it all. The couple of days before I'm awakening people and when I'm not doing any dates with Thera though, I'll at least get most of the third floor done. Just you watch, I'm going to murder whatever this test is. Brought up what? For a split second, imperceptible to anyone without a thought speed skill, the fluttering of pages stopped as Ben took in what his god said, only to go back with a renewed level of determination as a manic grin stretched across his face. The only 2 people at the 3rd tier he'd personally met had both been soul mages, and talking to the elder one had been a huge help in creating his soul crystals. He wasn't going to miss out on whatever this new one had to offer if he could get it. I am still so insanely jealous. Jake sighed as he watched Ben work as they all waited for the day to begin. There was a line of hundreds waiting out the door of Elvet's terrestrial residence to be let in, all to grasp the unbelievable opportunity that had been spread around the world so urgently. The fact that there was someone who could help awaken certain 8th-level magics. Both Elvet and Yuzu were doing their all to prepare themselves the best they could. Despite the power of their magics, it was more typical of them to stick with certain high-leveled individuals, trying to raise them up as much as possible in the time they had, rather than spending days meeting a group like that. But Ben was treating it like any other day for his part as he sat with the others, his clones within range as they each practiced their carving. If you're that jealous, all you need to do is get a few levels of parallel thought and complex mind to have enough going on in your head to be able to think for a different body, which isn't too hard. Of course, you also need to get an awakened connect of your own, but you can get all 3 skills from Zandale, plus you have Yuzu around to help with your leveling. Not to mention that you're looking at completing the 10 affinity towers, so you'd have 1 reward at the end to put to something other than your archmagic. I'd say it's doable for you if you put in the effort. That is not where he needs to be putting in effort, Vasta told them bluntly, staring at her apprentice. If he lives long enough, we can see about him doing that after. Besides, Zandale doesn't have time for that with the skill he's currently spreading. Yuliel sighed. All of his other bookings have basically been pushed back till after the war if they can't go and meet him themselves. Thera's face took a small, guilty look given she was the architect of Zandale's packed schedule. But Vasta waved her off. They were aware of the risk that the world would have lost the spirits otherwise, It was a worthy trade in the end. I know, but come on, think of how useful it could be, Jake argued as he imagined the possibilities. I could take lessons on magic while actively practicing my magic while working on other skills too. I could finally get some fighting skills in case I ever needed them. Not to mention the romantic implication dash. His words were cut off as both of his teachers along with Amy all moved as one, striking his head and gut while the last kicked him in the shin, leaving Jake on the ground. The hell are you saying around Yuzu and Thera? Amy spat at him, giving him a frosty glare that dug deeper than any of the strikes. Go be a degenerate somewhere else if you need to. Come on. It's not like Ben hasn't brought it up. I haven't. Someone hit him again for me, please. My hands are full. Vasta was happy to accommodate, striking her student upside the head as she muttered, asking herself if she'd gone wrong somewhere as Thera just looked concerned. What exactly is he talking about? She asked, leaning over to Amy as the other girl took her in her arms. Ignore him and just enjoy the fact that you aren't dating a pervert, she sighed. It must be nice. I mean, I wouldn't say Ben isn't a pervert, she mumbled, getting interested looks from both Amy and Yuzu, the latter of which finished up with her preparations. Tell me more, the young soul mage said, eyes gleaming. I smell something exciting. Even if he didn't say it, Ben was interested himself in whatever she was thinking. He thought he was taking things plenty slow for Thera's sake, given how new she was to the thought of dating and romance. Plus, she'd been the instigator of their relationship advancing further. He couldn't help but keep an ear open to the conversation as his curiosity got the better of him, even if it looked like he was still focused on his carving. Realizing she let herself say something embarrassing, too swept away by being around her friends, she could only mumble out her answer as she felt the blood rush to her cheeks, giving off a golden glow. I mean, whenever we're alone, he's always looking at and focusing on me no matter what we're doing, even if it's just cooking or something. I can always feel his eyes, even before we started dating. That's because you're beautiful and I love you. The answer was a load off his mind at least. The small worry he'd done something wrong gone, even if it was replaced with the sounds of Yuzu's excitement. The soul mage was positively shaking to talk more, only being held back by her guardians and teacher. And as charming as this all is, perhaps it's time we start letting people in and you can all have this sort of talk later? Vasta asked, looking to Elvit as the merman nodded from his pool. I believe I'm ready if the rest of you are. Ah, just one more minute from me, Ben called out. He was almost finished what he'd been working on and just wanted to get it complete before his real body needed to look like it was being a responsible and respectable apostle. Around the limbs of the various wooden carvings he made, he was tying strings to them and the handles made to control each, finishing 8 wooden marionettes of varying shapes and sizes. 2 for each of his homunculized hands. He'd made them for one simple reason: raising his puppetry. If controlling his 4 clones each counted towards the skill, then using actual puppets surely would help too, meaning he could practice with 12 at once like that, fiddling about with the time they had, putting on shows for himself while his true self was dedicated to building the minds of others for his work. It was only as his clone bodies began fiddling with them that he gave the okay. The real him sitting at the ready with both soul mages while Thera was at the side chatting with the others, ready to top up his mana as need be. The guards outside were alerted, ready to let the first one in as a dryad entered, Ben's face lighting up to see a familiar one as well. Right? Hentath, you were at the 8th level of low plant magic, weren't you? The moment she saw him, she stopped in her tracks, mouth briefly hanging open before shaking her head. Of course it's you. Hey, you can be happy to see me, you know? Let me get over my shock first. You're the one who figured out how to help awaken people. Of course I am. I'm great like that. Now come on and take a seat already. It took another second for her to get herself together, but in the end, she just shook her head and did as she was told. You know, if I'd known it was you, I would have brought Delaire. The little flower is working so hard to make sure she'll be a good apprentice for you one day. Tell her I'll visit soon. I'll even send her and the other kids some new toys with my next shipment of potions too. Is there anything else you guys might need? She showed a faint smile at the question, even if she hit his arm at it. Don't go trying to take our independence from us. Sending some toys for the kiddies and those potions is already more than enough. All right, well, just shoot me a letter if you ever need anything. But for now, let's get started. He already had a hand on her back and cast a quick look to the two soul mages, getting nods of confirmation that they had cast the spells they needed to before he began breaking down his minds, merging them and the necessary knowledge to create the seed with her own as he tried to guide her, pouring his personal supply on mana through the Elder Dryad as she tried to ignore the feeling, instead focusing on doing what she'd come for, materializing herself a seed. He wasn't sure what was different compared to doing it with Sakhel, be it his bit of experience he had from her that he couldn't have accessed during the first attempt, or else his new Awakener title, but things went shockingly smoothly. There were still things to correct along the way, bits of mana that didn't need to be lost vanishing into the ether after being improperly spent. But in the end, Hentath was glowing from the effect of her skill awakening as the power that came with the change filled her, all while he enjoyed his own notification. Score. I am so good at mind skills. He unraveled his mind from Hentath's watching as she reacted in mostly the same way her granddaughter had. She may have been doing a better job of keeping control of her emotions, but she was clutching the small seed, not wanting to lose it before Ben passed over a pre-prepared jar, having expected as much. Thank you, she told him and the soul mages earnestly, in perhaps the most sincere display he'd ever gotten from her. I don't know how to possibly dash. Don't worry about it, he told her. This was a deal between me and your god, and as long as I'm alive, I'll be able to keep doing it. Let that be a little motivation for the rest of your village, huh? As long as you all get up there eventually, I'll keep pushing you over the edge. I'll be sure to tell them, she said, her eyes smiling, even if watery. That's another reason for you to visit soon. After this, I'm sure our 6th and 7th levels will work themselves to the bone to improve. Ha! Then I'll look forward to great things next time I'm around. Are you heading back right away, or going to stick in town for a bit? When you're done with the other from the village, we're heading right back. Gotta share the good news, don't we? True. Well, in that case, it was nice seeing you, Hentath. Tell Dallaire and Fontesh I say hey. At that she burst into laughter, her good mood radiating from her. The moment I tell Dallaire I saw you and didn't bring her along, she's going to be nothing but complaints. But I suppose it really is the least I can do. Be safe, Apostle Boy. With that friendly exchange done, she left, a spring in her step that wasn't there before as strength and a few extra years came to her old bones. He stretched his arms as the next person came in, confidence radiating from him as they did. Hentath took longer than expected, but that was only due to the fact that they properly knew each other. He was sure to chat a bit with the other dryad that came from her village too, taking up some time, but from there all bets were off. As long as I make sure that both me and the soul mages are topped up and we try to keep everyone we can moving fast, if we're lucky we might be able to do one every 2 or 3 minutes. At 1,500 people to do, working pretty much all day each time, it will take about a week to get them all done, but it will be worth it in the end. I can all but taste some levels coming my way. Even if it was sure to kill his mana growth rate in that time, it was a period he could devote to working on the technical aspect of a few of his skills, something he wasn't going to let himself miss out on as he worked to take all he could. Another done. Each day the line got shorter as he and the 2 soul mages worked on the task they'd taken, artificially pushing people beyond the limits of their skills to bring them to greater heights than the majority would ever reach alone. The first 20, the plant mages, had been the hardest by far. The need to force each of them to make a seed had pushed his minds each time as well as their own, each of them feeling the weight of his thoughts merging into their heads. But when that was done, things became so much smoother, routine even, at least for him. Knowing the structure of any element, air, or water was so much easier in comparison it was almost boring. Far from boring, though, was seeing the various people their work had drawn. Along with the terrestrial races he was more used to seeing, there were also all of those who made their homes in the oceans, coming up through the same watery pool Elvet was using to be awakened as both groups alternated who would come in and who out, each person barely getting the time to give their thanks before being rushed along for the next to come through. Plus, I'm getting to see some interesting builds as well, which is a positive. He wasn't going to not take advantage of the situation with all of the work he was putting in after all. He had his deal with the gods, which meant that everyone after the plant mages was being accompanied by an awakened skill holder, and he'd made sure to take whatever he could from all of them, increasing his arsenal for his goal of creating something legendary. But if anyone awakened to any novel form of magic or a unique bonus skill, he made sure to claim it too, along with anything else that might exist within their status. Still, we've gotten some interesting ones, haven't we? I even saw someone with an awakened crafting and enchanting who must have grabbed Connect from Zandale. Can't believe I wasn't told about them. Honestly, exceptionally lame. Wish I could have picked their brain a bit. Not to mention all of the other summon groups. They definitely pulled a variety. Please tell me you're almost done, Jake begged, getting a flick to his head for looking away from his lessons. I'm so extremely bored and I can't escape if I'm stuck here. If we have to be here, then so do you, Vasta told him coldly. And if you keep trying to escape from your lessons, then I'm going to start tying you to a chair and leaving you there till you actually prove you've learned something. Besides, weren't you out late partying all night? Amy asked, shaking her head. Socializing. And so were you. Yes, but the difference is that I'm diligently practicing, she told him, swinging her weapon as its form shifted in her hand, forcing her movements to go with it for each change. Besides, I needed to make sure you didn't say or do anything that might embarrass Yuzu, and I personally think I did an excellent job if I do say so myself. The young soul mage beamed as she thought about the prior night, while Ben couldn't help but acknowledge at least a little tact from the gods. Each day of awakenings was being scheduled by some higher power, and whichever one had done it had arranged each group of summoned to meet on the same day, giving many a chance to see people they hadn't gotten to in years. With only 2 groups left. We'll be done today, don't worry. One of his homunculi spoke as they were drawing, each of the 4 sketching out the scene around them and filling books in their speed. If you haven't noticed, we've been missing one group in particular. Humans. Specifically them and the Grey. Unlike other groups that may have been missing people if there wasn't anyone for Ben to try and forcefully level, all of them were being told to come for Ben to copy their skills, thanks to both his deal with the gods as well as his one with Quillith. It will be nice to see everyone again for a bit, Amy smiled. It's really just you, Steph, and Will we're keeping up with. It will be cool to see how the rest are doing. You're absolutely right, Amy. We need to throw a party, Jake yelled, already invested in the idea as Vasta grumbled, but let him have the moment, knowing how long it had been since he'd seen the people he'd died with. We've got plenty of space for it at our place. We get some music going, have Ben on cooking duty, then we can enjoy some mingling and we're golden. Why am I on cooking duty? He yelled back. I'm human too. But you're also the best cook we know, he was told brightly. And the only one I know who's bothered to figure out how to replicate any classic Earth cooking, so having you is vital. I'll buy the ingredients, it will be great. Okay, fine, whatever. How many do you think I'll be cooking for? There may have only been 20 humans, but he was obviously bringing Thera and Jake was sure to bring Yuzu. He wasn't going to discount the possibility of anyone else bringing friends or companions too. If I had to guess, I'd say 60, Amy told him, looking apologetic in the face of his shocked expression. If it's anything like Yuzu's group, a lot of people are going to have a guard or 2 with them. Why would you guys need guards? He asked, imagining how much work that was going to be, as well as thinking about cooking on such a greater scale than normal. Who's going to hurt any of you? We're resources, she said with a shrug. It's better safe than sorry. He wasn't sure he bought that, imagining at least part of it was to try and keep any of their precious awakened skill holders from feeling whimful and deciding to leave for another nation. But he didn't say any of that, instead thinking of everything he'd need as he made one of his homunculi write down a list before tearing it out to toss to Jake. Here's everything I'll need then. I can at least make a few pizzas and pasta. You wrote stove on here, plus a bunch of other utensils. Yeah, because if someone is making me cook for 60, 1 isn't going to cut it. Honestly, I'd say buy 2 or 3. You should have the money for that, right? I mean, yeah, but dash. Great, then better get on it, Ben told him, waving a hand his way. You have people who do your shopping, right? Just get one of them to handle it. All right, fine, in that case, gotta see if anyone is lined up there already and spread the good word. I'll be back in a few, he called out as he started to get up to run away, only being kept from that by his teacher's powerful grip. "Now wait just 1 minute," Vasta told him. "Isn't there something you're forgetting?" No. We put it off until the last day to give you a sliver of a chance, so see if Ben can help raise your magic at all before you leave." Damn it. He was all but pushed into Ben's arms. Looking like he was faced with another chore he had no choice but to accept. "Fine, fine. Come on, Ben. Lay it on me. All right, but no complaining after." After the few days of constant working on it, Ben had grown strangely used to disassembling his minds as he moved to wrap them around and through Jake's. Feeling him try not to resist against the foreignness of it as he gave them over, the other man's brain power increasing and filling with the same thing the Dryads had. The instructions for materializing a seed. Since Jake had archmagic, it wouldn't make sense to have him materialize something that only fell into one category, so that was what he ended with. The complexity of it should have been more than enough to get the job done, but it fell against one heavy wall that made it so even as Ben was feeling it work, the seed forming from pure mana, he couldn't hear a single notification going off in his head. Jake tried to keep from looking disappointed, even if it was clear in his mind, but there wasn't much getting away from it. The level of his archmagic was already higher than anyone would expect from conquering half of the magic towers. The act of materializing just wasn't enough to push it over to the limit again, at least not so soon after his last level. "Oh well," he sighed. "Maybe if I get the hang of it on my own. Of course, by then I'll have already beaten a few other towers, so still probably not." "Hey, it's not like we're done," Ben told him, grabbing him before he could go and gesturing at himself as he explained. "It's not like you don't have anything else to work with. Try again with your plain mana and we'll see how this works out." Ben already knew Jake was only at the first level of that particular skill. Even if it was already awakened, that left plenty of room to grow, and Ben was going to force him to get the most out of it, no matter how hard it might be. He forced him to sit down again as Elvit and Yuzu kept up their spells while Ben felt him try and fail. It was clear Jake was naturally leaning towards using his affinitied mana for it, and even if that made perfect sense, he couldn't allow it, so he carefully poked and prodded, whispering in his friend's mind as he guided him towards the correct path. Even as Jake's body wanted to reject it, he felt the man concentrate on his thoughts, pushing away the wrong options as mana was lost in his failures. Even as he got closer, his non-affinitied mana snapped into place and a seed was created, with a notification going off in his mind, singing his success. Hearing it left Jake beaming. A smile stretched across his cheeks as he patted Ben's back. "My guy, you really are the best. Vasta, I got a level. That deserves at least 1 day of a break. Doesn't it? Fine, you can relax tomorrow. But that doesn't mean you can go too wild tonight, you hear? Loud and clear. Okay. I'm off to see whatever other humans are around, so make sure you finish up quick, Ben. I'll have those stoves set up for you the moment you're done. It feels like my work is being rewarded with more work," he said offhand, going unheard as the other man ran off. "Oh well, just a bit more and then I'm free to focus on some other things." "Ahem," a voice said from his side, pulling his eye as both Yuliel and Vasta tried to look casual despite their obvious desire, leaving him to sigh. Yeah. I guess I can see if things will work out for the two of you now, so let's get it over already so I can move on to the rest." "Don't gloat," Yuliel warned back in Amy's home while Vasta was beaming. "And you don't be jealous. You're getting levels from the towers at least. Meanwhile, I'm stuck practicing the best I can for all of mine while trying to teach someone who doesn't even want to learn. Let me enjoy this." The non-affinity maid shot back, even if that was no longer the most accurate thing to call her for the fact that she was no longer the only one in the world with the skill. There had obviously been Jake for a few years by that point, but Ben had just helped awaken 2 more who had been trying to reach the same height. Of course, she still had the highest level of any of them, and by a decent margin too, but the side effect of that was that she would be having 2 new students joining her lessons with Jake in an effort to help them get comfortable with the potential of their new power. Ben, for his part, ignored them, focusing entirely on his cooking as he rushed to make enough to feed a crowd, despite the limits he had to work under. He had his 4 homunculi, of course, their faces hidden away under Amy's instruction to keep any of their old classmates from being freaked out if they happened to see them. But there was still a limit of hands for all of the cutting, kneading, and cooking that needed to be done, leaving him to rely on his mana, as anyone watching would think that a lot of the work was just doing itself, with pans flipping their contents and spoons stirring pots under his extended control. Ben?" Amy asked, guilt in her voice from seeing how much work Jake dumped on him without a second thought. "Could you use a hand?" "Nah. Don't worry about it. With how much I have going on, it's easier by myself," he told her, trying to be reassuring despite the chaos in his kitchen. "How long do we have?" "I think people will start arriving in 10-ish minutes." Her comment was immediately rewarded with the sight of him working even faster as the bit of guilt festered, even as Thera tried to reassure her. "Don't worry, he really is happier this way." "Are you sure?" "Happier might be a bit of a stretch, but at the very least it is kind of interesting to be acting as an entire kitchen staff all by myself," he told her, trying to make sure his only uncovered face looked positive. It wasn't like it was that bad, and he really didn't mind. Any pressure he was feeling was just self-imposed. He wanted everything to be delicious for everyone, and he wanted to have a nice, fun environment for their little class reunion. Sure, he'd seen them all to some extent over the course of the day, but that hadn't been a reunion so much as it had been work. They barely got to exchange any words, and even if he wasn't close enough to any of them back on Earth to care, now that they were all they each had of the human race, he couldn't help but want to make the best of a time like that given how low the odds were it would happen again. As one set of pizzas came out of the oven, another went in with the sounds of knocking at the door, clearly their expected guests since the gatesman let them through as Jake rushed out to greet them. "Okay. If the rest of you want to start taking some of this out and lining tables buffet style, then I'll finish up here and be out in a bit as I finish up the last of it. Just give me a few." He had more food in the ovens and more munchies to complete, not to mention a dessert, but he had his drive and wasn't going to let himself fall flat at the finish line. Every body he had was moving with a renewed level of speed and precision, and he watched through many eyes as it all came together into a cohesive whole, ready to be fed to any waiting guests. Seems like those two skills like to grow together. Guess it makes sense given that my so-called puppets have hands for me to use. Maybe something to think a bit more on later. For the time being, he loaded up his arms with plates, leaving behind his clones as he carried out all he could to place down with the rest, not noticing how many eyes were making their way to him at first until he turned around to greet the crowd with a smile, taking in far more than anyone expected. He didn't make any big show of his arrival, not thinking himself special enough to warrant something so flashy, but under the effect of his absolute thought speed he felt like he had. All he'd done had been slip through the kitchen door to the lounge area, but dozens of eyes had flicked his way, holding just a little longer than could be considered passing interest before going back to their conversations, none wanting to be too obvious as to their intent as Ben did his best to keep any displeasure from his face. He wasn't really clear to what extent information about his skills had gotten out, but there were plenty of clues to give away the fact that he had a few awakened ones. His awakened crafting was a publicly known fact given how it had happened, and if rank 1 adventurers were in any way public then they might know he had at least 2. And I'm not really shy about materializing things, so that adds a third, plus I've shown I can help others awaken under the right conditions, which doesn't necessarily imply a fourth, but it doesn't have to make me valuable. Damn it, this is going to be a recruitment drive, isn't it? The most annoying part of it was that he wasn't just seeing it in the eyes of the people acting as the other humans' escorts, but a few of his old classmates as well, no doubt asked by their friends and higher-ups in their new homelands to see about bringing him into the fold. But I don't actually know if that's the case yet, so I gotta give them the benefit of the doubt. He told himself, trying to be positive, even as he stretched out the effects of his deep connection as far as they would go, ready to read the minds of anyone who walked in his path as the first came to him, her escort looking familiar as well. "Ben, it's been so long." "A girl," Sarah told him enthusiastically, a Jotun noblewoman he'd once rebuked by her side. "How have you been? Jake's been talking up your food since we got in, so I've been looking forward to giving it a try. And your eyes are purple now." On the surface of her mind, she really was just making conversation, wanting a friendly chat to catch up, even if she'd been asked to, just like he'd expected. It seemed like someone was hoping they might cozy up enough that he could be talked into visiting, where the real recruitment drive would start. The woman beside her, on the other hand, someone Ben had made a brace for in the past but hadn't cared enough to remember her name, was busy thinking of any way she could work things to make not only herself, but Sarah as appealing as possible, putting words to tell her off on the tips of his lips. Stop. This is a party. Even if it's annoying, I don't want to ruin the mood. Just a side effect of a skill, but I'm doing well, he told her brightly. Got a nice job, made some friends, got a super cool and beautiful girlfriend over there chatting with Steph. If you get the chance, you should say hi. She's great. He was going a bit over the top, but he at least wanted to make it clear that he was taken and seduction of any sort wasn't going to work, even as the Jotun was thinking about how humans didn't seem entirely monogamous because of one particular relationship. Damn it, Jake, going around and complicating the perception of all humans everywhere because you're an idiot. Of course, from the looks of things, he's not the only person who came here with a couple lovers. He could already see the idea of seduction being used as a tool against him in the eyes of some others, but Sarah at least seemed to get the idea. Ha, lucky girl then, she told him, moving on to talk about herself and what she'd been up to for a span until he could find an excuse to politely slip away. There were a lot of people around after all, he couldn't only focus on one. And maybe I can enjoy some conversation from someone without any ulterior motive. There's got to be a few, right? His optimism was admirable, even in the face of all of the hungry eyes who'd noticed he no longer had a conversation partner, all of them waiting for the perfect time to strike. Sup, you look alone and ready to be talked into moving to my magical home, Carly teased. One of the few that had no reason to try and talk him into anything given the strong connection he already had to Analia. I'm glad it's not just obvious to me, he sighed. This has made the night so much less fun. Ha! Well, Pelania did tell me that if anyone else was bothering you, I should tell you to marry Thera and maybe it would stop. Since it hasn't, even though my engagement is public knowledge, I don't think getting married is going to do anything. Probably not. I think she just wants to see her daughter's wedding. She laughed. If you do get married, you have to cater it yourself though. This is delicious. Why does everyone always tell me to cook for events I'm taking part in? Part of the fun of these things is getting to enjoy the taste of anyone else's hard work. But you'd do the cooking for it if Thera asked you, right? In a heartbeat. Ha! Then I'll make sure I tell her to tell you. Speaking of, I think I'll mingle with her and Amy for a bit. I just wanted to say hi between all of your recruiters. Please come save me again if you can, he told her, waving her off and in a slightly better mood for the chat. It wasn't like everyone there was interested in recruiting him, with only about a quarter of the humans and about 50% of their handlers, but of them all, they were the ones making the greatest effort to talk to him. He had plenty of respect for anyone who had declined their nation's requests on the grounds that they really weren't that close before their deaths, but it still left him at the hands of those who were proactively going for him. Where the hell are Will and Jake? They should be saving me and… Wait, did Jake talk Will into an eating contest? I didn't cook all of that for it to not be savored. As soon as I get my hands on them… Hey Ben! A new voice called out in a friendly tone as they made their way over. I've wanted to chat all night, but it looks like you've been Mr. Popular. How've you been? Hey John, good to see you, he began, putting back on his friendly face as he waited for the other to step into the range of his skill to see whatever nefarious goals were hidden in his thoughts. I wonder what he was offered. So many were just told they'd get a bonus or a fun new toy. They really should look for a little more and wait, nothing? No hidden agenda for coming to say hi? Oh John, Johnny boy, what an absolute sweetheart. Here we are with a quarter of the humans on the planet trying to have me pulled into the nations that took them for their own added benefit, and all he's thinking about is how glad he is to see none of us died yet. And he's trying not to let on that he even cried for me when I was pronounced dead back in Galwax's trial. Myriad, get me his mailing address, someone is being sent a fortune in equipment. No, we spoke occasionally but weren't even acquaintances. Still, anyone who'll shed some tears for me deserves nothing but the best that I can provide. Among the rest, he could also feel just genuine worry for him given how he'd been left behind to fend for himself. That touched his heart, making him move to put the other at ease. Life's honestly been good, man. I have a job I love. I've made friends. Met a great girl and honestly feel like I've been making this place my home. I'd love to talk about the last couple years for a bit, if you don't have anyone else to chat with right now. You sure? It looks like a lot of people want to talk with you. Bah, don't worry about them. And you need to tell me how you've been too. I want the details about the life of John on the alien world. It wasn't how he'd expected the night to go, nor who he'd been expecting to spend so much time talking to, but as the hours wore on he couldn't help but enjoy that little bit of company as they talked the night away until it was finally time for them to part as the 20 humans of the world said their goodbyes for a second time, the mood for all of them being a lot brighter than the first. Waking up the next day, he was tight in Thera's grasp as he let himself enjoy the feeling of a lazy morning for the first time in a week. He still had a couple of days until it was time for his test at the library, and he was content to take things a bit easier until then given all he'd done, both with helping so many awaken or level their magics, as well as with the after-party only the night before. Speaking with John had done wonders for his mood, along with after when he'd spent time with the other humans he was genuinely close to in the world, talking a bit with Will and Steph and getting a laugh from watching others react to the relationship that Amy shared with Jake and Yuzu. Even if plenty had been a pain, there'd been enough fun to be had that made it worthwhile, and he was content to reminisce on it as he gently stroked Thera's head, waiting for her to get up. Hey? She said, obviously groggy as she nestled in closer. You should have woken me if you were up. There's no rush. Besides, I don't get to see you sleep too often. Gotta enjoy it while I can. Which reminds me, I wonder if Sonia awakening her life magic was enough to make Thera comfortable with discussing us sharing a room with her aunt. I guess I'll mention it whenever we get back. I've already let her know I'd like to. There's no rush. Much better to enjoy things as they are. MMH, don't say that or I'll go back for more, she told him. Eyes still closed and making no effort to start the day. Were you going to do more studying at the library today? I'm honestly not super worried about that. There's a chance I don't pass for the 5th floor this time, but there's no way I don't get the 4th. I was actually thinking we could maybe have a date day if you'd be up for it. That was enough to get her to open her eyes. What did you have in mind? I overheard about something that sounded pretty fun in the area, and maybe we could get a meal someone else cooks for a change too? Ha! Tired of it after yesterday? More like in need of a small break. I'll be back to wearing myself down into a fine paste before you know it. Just you wait. Then I better take advantage of you while I can. She laughed, finally starting to get up as she did. What did you have in mind? Something a little different. It should be fun, you'll see. After they both got up and dressed they went off, going through the streets of the magic towers in search of a certain sight. Something he'd only heard about thanks to some of his spare mind's eavesdropping on the people around him as he did his reading in the library. They were going to a zoo. Haven't gotten your fill of seeing dangerous, exotic animals in person? Thera laughed. Something's going to escape and maul you. We are absolutely not being so negative about my chances of surviving a romantic day out. Everything should be caged. There's no way anything goes that catastrophically wrong. Not you two. You're both going to have me jumping at shadows if you guys keep talking like that. Of course, Thera was partially right. He'd gotten to see plenty of creatures on the world who would be more than happy to treat him as a snack, but it had always been in the context of him either hunting or being hunted. The idea of seeing some new ones in a peaceful context was exciting. He hadn't been to a zoo since he was a kid, and the things he was going to encounter were sure to be a lot more interesting for a couple different reasons. The alien world he found himself living on for one, and the city it was located in for another. They were still in the magic towers after all, and the zoo was primarily a research area for creatures that had any form of innate ability to wield their mana. He paid their entrance fees as they went in arm, and already looking around as they spotted different enclosures, signs up front and diagrams of animals, since anything in there could be a little dangerous to get too close to, even with the distance. There was always the chance of something being out of view, but that still created the opportunity to learn. The list of exhibits seemed extensive too. Sure, there were some the two were already familiar with, like the pixie dragons and stone apes, but there were plenty they hadn't seen before. Giant slug-like things that's bodies would exude flames in a rocky area, leaving patches of the ground glowing as they slowly moved over them. Something that looked like a small, scaled disc floating above the ground and clearly in the air affinity. And small rodents running over the surface of deep ponds, walking on the very water as they played. Not seeing any time ferrets thought, he muttered as he looked around while Thera giggled. Can you imagine how much of a pain it would be to capture any of them to put on display? It looks like they don't have anything out with a magic that could cause too much harm. Lucky you. You really do believe way too strongly that I have bad luck. I think life's been going pretty well recently, if I do say so myself. I literally just watched you be taken apart in a way that's going to give me nightmares forever. Ignore everything that happened in the tower. It's not good to dwell on the past. It wasn't even 2 weeks ago. Well, things have been going great since then. He laughed, letting himself enjoy the conversation and the day as a whole. It really is nice to have a break every now and then. That takes so little mentally, it's like I'm not even doing it. His god asked again, knowing that small, thimble-sized statues of every creature they saw were coming into existence in his pocket as they spoke. That's just making souvenirs, since it didn't look like there was a shop for them. Besides, all of that together doesn't take up a third of my mines, which means it's negligible. Thera was already pulling him to another enclosure as he was having his back and forth with his god, looking into one that was styled to look like an Arctic region, with the cold from the snow and ice that filled it being felt even from afar as Thera moved closer to him while they looked over the edge, trying to spy whatever it might contain and seeing a creature poke its small body through the snow. With thick fur and plenty plump, exactly what one would expect from something from a northern region. The small animal locked its 3 eyes on them before wiggling its 4 arms as the 2 of them waved back, enjoying the little display right until it exerted its will on the world around it, raising a ball of snow into the air and shooting it on a collision course with Ben's face. It was just snow, so it wasn't a big deal, but in an instant his thought speed skills pushed all of his minds to their limits and he forced his body to react as it sailed forward, getting his face just out of the way and letting the ball fall harmlessly to the ground, having missed its target. Safe! He cheered, throwing his hands in the air and turning to give Thera his cockiest of smiles at having successfully dodged the only attack to come his way that day despite her constant teasing him over his poor luck, only to feel the cold smack of snow and ice as he did. A second, unseen one of the creatures having taken aim at the side of his head while he was distracted and getting a better result than it could have ever hoped for when he turned just in time to get it head on, enjoying seeing it explode into slush before Thera clung to him, using his body as support to handle the intense fit of laughter she was dealing with after having gotten to see all of it up close. What are these things called? Challels? He asked, giving the one that hit him a dirty look as it insisted on waving its arms and looking cute. I think we could hunt them to extinction. Their parts would probably be great for making water affinity weapons. What do you say? Ha! I say don't bully them and let's get you a towel to dry off. It was taking all she had not to laugh even more, leaving her with a huge grin stretched across her face as they made their way to a canteen and explained the situation as a helpful employee was more than willing to help him dry off, after which they sat for a while, enjoying some snacks and drinks. So, having fun? He asked, already knowing the answer as he looked at her. We don't have anything like this in Analia, so this is great, she told him happily. An all-around excellent idea. It really is incredible seeing just what's out there. Ha, yeah. It's crazy what this world has to offer. I like it though. It's neat to see a bit more of what's around. Seeing all of the strange life of his new home left him thinking on how it compared to his old one. Something Thera was interested in herself. If you don't mind, want to tell me a bit about the animals on your world? She knew Earth could be a complicated subject for him, but she wanted to know more about his old home, and talking about it wasn't the fresh wound that it once was given the years that had passed. Sure, there were plenty of pretty neat ones, he told her, holding his hand over the table to materialize a number of thumb-sized figurines for her to look at, each of them capturing the likeness of ones he'd personally seen. We'd have 1,000 some odd varieties of dogs, with these ones being retrievers, chihuahuas, and bulldogs, he told her, trying to show off the range of them as she laughed. These are not all the same animal. Try something a little more convincing. It's true, this is what happens when people take domestication and breeding to an extreme. Otherwise, there were a few breeds of cats too, though I don't think I could name many, along with squirrels, horses, and raccoons. We'd also have eagles and hummingbirds, along with blue jays like the one I made for your necklace, and honestly a bunch of others too. The cats look cute, she said, picking up the small figure he'd made and looking it over. And you had more, right? Something pants? that had ears similar to Vasta. Haha, elephants, yeah. But I think the only time I saw them in person was when I went to a zoo back on Earth. They were from a very different part of the world. Let's see, if I'm also talking about other creatures I know were on the planet, then we have a few species of bear, larger cats like lions and tigers, giraffes and hippos and rhinos and more. With each one he named, he kept bringing forth more small statues with his mana, letting her pick them up and look them over as she asked her questions, and he gave whatever answers he could, both of them enjoying the experience and the day. Sitting alone in her office, Killy had no idea how much time had passed while she'd been reading, each of her 4 arms holding a different document, her eyes scanning pages at a rapid pace to get through them as she absorbed it all, even if only one in particular was taking up the majority of her attention. As the head librarian of the Magic Towers, she tried to go through all reports submitted to the Mages Guild for new techniques and achievements, always wanting to see if there was anything of enough value to take a place in the shelves of the main building instead of being relegated to one of the branch facilities off to the sides, even if that rarely ended up happening. Too often, someone would think they discovered something, only for it to be a rehash of an older study, perhaps having some novel differences to give it a bit more value, but little in the way of anything genuinely new. But then I'll get a gem like this. She sighed contentedly, reading it over one more time, even though every word had already been memorized. It's at least a 4th-floor document, no doubt about it, even if the number of people who could make use of it are beyond limited. Let's see, it really would just be that student that Vasta and Yuliel took, wouldn't it? If he was a little brighter at least. Of course, any enchanters that come in would get more than their fair share from studying the ideas presented alone. I should make a note to make sure the Craftsman's Guild gets a copy too. Or at least what's left of it. Since the spirits all but destroyed Craftsman's Tower, it did complicated things, but it seemed that the second largest branch had taken the role of becoming the head one since then, even if it was still in the restructuring period as the various branches worked to deal with the loss. Just thinking about it gave her a headache. At the very least, their library had been moved since the city had been an invasion point. She didn't want to think of the loss of knowledge that would have occurred if that wasn't the case. It wasn't like copies didn't exist in other guilds. Even for her own, any truly relevant work from any floor would exist in the branches and general libraries across the world, ensuring they weren't lost, but there was always the risk of something falling through the cracks. Just because she couldn't see the value of a particular work enough to ensure it had a copy or two across the planet, didn't mean it couldn't be the seed that sprouted a major discovery for someone else entirely. Still, she'd caught up on everything of value while she'd been away dealing with her own student, so she couldn't put off dealing with the rest of her work any longer as she stretched out, feeling the ache in her bones from however long she'd been reading. You really can't escape age no matter the level of skill, she muttered to herself, rubbing some life back into her body as she got up. Of course, I may have put off getting a checkup a bit longer than I should have. Adding that to the schedule too, I suppose. It was something she could do later in the day. She was sure it must have been late in the night, so she decided to spare some words with whoever was minding the ground floor before heading off. Good morning, Miss Killy, Ovali, a librarian who was firmly on day duty, told her the moment she left her office, alerting her to the fact that she'd been a bit too optimistic about how long she'd been reading. I thought you weren't due back till tomorrow? Ah, I'm sure it's about what you expect. More trouble with Verbum? She asked sympathetically, watching as Killy was left rubbing her head. He has the brain but zero backbone. I'm thinking I'll just toss him with a couple adventurers for some of the other investigations and leave things at that. Ovali just shook her head, not saying a word. As careless as such a thing might seem given how important he was, her boss was just as much so. If she really thought that was the right course of action, then as his teacher, it wasn't anyone's place to say anything against it. Of course, that wouldn't stop her or anyone else from thinking the library head was just feeling justifiably sick of him. I think there's a rank one with an awakened space magic, she thought to herself, beginning to seriously consider the idea she'd said largely in jest. This might actually be a decent way to get him a bit more independent. She filed away the thought in her head, saving it as something to be more deeply considered later. Since she'd clearly been wrong about the time and had read through the night, that meant she actually had work that needed to be done. So what have I missed? She asked, already preparing herself for bad news. So often when she was out, either being asked to investigate different events or to help with the world's strategizing. She was piled with work, but for a change it seemed she was destined for some good news. Me and Soso handled the majority. Don't worry, she said, easing Killy's mind and changing the library head's thoughts to handing out bonuses. I wouldn't say you have anything more pressing than the regular documents. Oh, but you do have a test scheduled. The taker was interested in doing it for the 4th and 5th floors back to back. Confident, huh? Well, it's not like that does any harm and can put expectations in place about what's needed for the 5th floor, so not a bad idea in practice if he ever wants to retake it. Of course, if he really does think he can handle both, he must be confident in his path of study. So what sort of magic is he looking to be tested on? She asked, feeling just a little curious despite herself, only to have that curiosity instantly dashed. Ah, that's where it gets interesting. He said it didn't matter. He was fine being tested on anything. Never mind, just a cocky one then. She sighed. She had her favorites for what anyone might ask to be quizzed on, with what she enjoyed most always ending up being discussions where different branches would meet, but most would just play it safe and answer based on what they considered their main affinity. On the other side of things, every now and then they'd get people asking to be tested broadly like their new challenger had, but the vast majority would fail for either 2nd or 3rd floor tests. Actually, I don't remember anyone passing for the 3rd floor who said anything along those lines. Do we know how he was tested for the 3rd floor? She asked, seeing Olavi's smile widen at the expected question. That's the thing, he didn't. He along with another both received recommendations from both Ulil and Vasta. What? That just didn't happen. Killy could only be surprised that the two even remembered they were granted that level of authority given how little they used it. Sure, their apprentice and the young soul mage were both given access to the 4th and 5th floors respectively, but that was more a matter of course given the skills they'd come to the world with than due to them actually earning the right. The exception only so they might have a chance to rise to the level they needed to be, even if it wasn't fair for anyone who'd properly earned their place on those floors. And that's not all. Olavi went on, her eyes alight. He reads a lot. An unbelievable amount. And he's been bringing in homunculi, so he can read even more. How do you use meat puppets to read more? You've honestly got to see it for yourself. At first a few librarians and other patrons didn't actually believe he was reading and thought he was just trying to look impressive, but a few people tested him on books he'd finished and he kept being right, and since then he's become something of an attraction with people gonna quiz him. Hearing that, Killy couldn't help but give a thoroughly displeased look. If you all verified that he really is reading, then nobody should be disturbing him, same as any other guest. How annoying would you find it if someone interrupted you in the middle of a book just to make sure you were getting it to their satisfaction? Learning isn't some race. I know, but he doesn't seem to mind it. Hell, he barely seems to notice, he just keeps reading more. Olavi seemed positively giddy, to the point that she didn't know what to think. Was he not just being cocky like she'd first thought? And how could he possibly be reading to make others feel the need to constantly bother him about it? I think I might need to see this boy myself, she muttered. When's his test? Tomorrow. But if you want to give him a look, I think he's just started reading on the 2nd floor. 2nd? If he plans on being tested for the 4th and 5th dash. It will make sense when you see him, she laughed. It really is quite the spectacle. A vague explanation like that couldn't help but pick at her interest as she parted, making her way up the stairs to see just what the big fuss was about. She had her convictions about how a library should be run. Nobody should be bothered in their study. It was exactly why the floors had been divided when it was founded however many centuries ago, so that people who were best suited to learning more advanced branches of knowledge wouldn't be distracted, nor have to wait for any document that was in the hands of someone who perhaps wouldn't be at a place in their study where they could put it to use. It was no place to gawk at anyone doing their reading. At least that was what she told herself until she saw them. Books floating in the air above the eyes of 5 identical people. What must have been 100 of them with their pages all moving faster than even she would be able to read before going back into their place. Only for more to be pulled out as in a matter of seconds they'd finished the case they were at to move on to the next. All of them moving as one. Okay, I think I see why people wanted to check if he really was reading. Is this why he's not on the 3rd floor? If he really is able to take everything in like that, then he might have finished everything it had to offer. She couldn't begin to imagine what sort of skill would make such a thing possible. Her mind going to the idea of a third-tier speed reading but dismissing it out of hand. If anyone had achieved such a thing, she would have been told. But then what could it be? It has to at least be awakened, but even an awakened speed reading wouldn't allow this, or at least not if it awakened alone. Maybe if it combined with some thought speed skills or even time magic as a whole, but then there's still the matter of learning it all and processing it. A person with magic knowledge then? Possibly even a proper knowledge holder? That would be exciting. Of course, there is always the chance that this is just some trick to pull attention, but if that is the case, it really is too flashy. She felt her heart swell with excitement as she let herself think that maybe, just maybe, testing him would prove to be more interesting than she'd first thought as her legs carried her over. Off to do what she'd scorned only minutes before as she went to their side, pulling one particular book she was fond of out of the shelf they'd just finished, turning to them all as she did. "Mind if I ask your thoughts on this?" She couldn't help but question as one of them flicked his eyes at her before doing a double take along with the other four. All of them looking at her curiously before most got back to their reading, while only one focused on the book, his eyes lighting up as he did. "Ah, that was a good one. If you're looking for a work on the intersecting points of dark and death, then I'd recommend it. Using both to enhance the power of the other is clearly an obvious thing. But the subtle mechanics behind it with the ratios of mana for different spells to bring out each effect was studied with rigorous detail. I assume you can access the third floor." "I can," she told him, finding herself enjoying the exchange as he handed over a sheet of paper. "These are my recommendations that build on the topic if you're interested. I personally think they're worth your time if this is your area of study." Thank you." He wasn't holding anything before he gave this to me, was he? And even if he was, why would he just have a list like this already prepared? She let her eyes scan over it given what he said and found herself approving of his choices of further reading from the short list. But that only made her want to probe further. "You don't think that Kfaftas on debuffing and the long-term potential is worth a read too? I think it would align rather well with the rest you have here." At that, he stopped reading entirely to focus on her, even as the other four kept going. Just what is it about them? She wondered for a second before finally picking up that they all had the same face. Ah, clones. So these must be the homunculi. But how is he using them to read as well? It was a question to ponder later. She could see that he was getting into the topic and found herself more than a little interested too. It is a good book, don't get me wrong, but if you're interested in the intersecting points between dark and death, then the first four I have listed do a far better job covering the topic. And if your interest lies in developing the area of study, then the last three are better as well. If you were only going to read one, then that would work fine as an all-rounder, but you'd get a lot more from the 7 I have listed there. Very good, I'd answer along the same lines. I wouldn't mind discussing the topic a bit deeper, but that's not the most exciting of options, is it? At the very least, it seems he has more than a superficial knowledge, so he's not just skimming. She immediately pulled another, this one far broader in scope, only to see a grimace replace the previously cheerful expression he wore. "I take it you don't approve of this book?" She laughed, already interested in his response. "I mean, I guess it's not bad, but the author's biases are pretty clear in it. They couldn't find much potential in combining light and fire magic and wrote the field off as a whole after diving into a few spells that already existed. Just because they personally couldn't see it, I don't think it makes sense to decide an entire area of study is pointless just because they lacked imagination. Honestly, I don't think it should even be in the main building. If I was interested in researching the topic, I wouldn't really find it to be a helpful reference." "Oh? So do you see any potential beyond what they talk about then?" "That depends. Are we talking using different spells in tandem, or combining affinities to make a new unified spell? And are we looking at something that could be applied by a single person or as a group? What option do you think would be most impressive?" "Well, obviously how well using spells in tandem is going to work is only going to be limited to your imagination and the situation you're in. I can easily imagine using light and fire spells together to make an endless supply of traps for hunting. But that's not the most technically impressive, so let's narrow it down to unified spells that will feed off both types of mana. what you usually see, as well as what the book discusses, is the idea that the only two aspects worth exploring are how to use light to enhance the illumination which a fire will already give off and the applications of such a thing, and how fire can pair with the healing aspects of light to regulate a patient's body temp for a more efficient healing process in the same way life can be used, only less efficiently since it's not quite as good. But from there we can see an immediately obvious aspect that is going to pull from the third major aspect of light magic: buffing. If temperature regulation can help with healing, then it can help with any aspect of the body. I can easily see how it would make any buffs more efficient overall, with the output depending on the caster's affinities and levels, along with total mana and knowledge of the physiology of their target. A good answer. She wasn't being honest enough. It was exactly what she'd been looking for when she'd pulled the book to ask about, even if he said one thing that piqued her interest further. And is there a way to go beyond that if you have multiple casters then? Well, for that we'd be going into the realm of ritual magic, which really is going a bit farther beyond what most would expect, especially considering that not many types of mana are going to be at play, but given the increase of power, I think there's a world where it could easily be used to create a powerful attack. He started, handing over another piece of paper that had most certainly not been in his hands only minutes before, containing diagrams and charts of exactly what he was thinking as he went on with his explanation. If you had 5 mages around the 9th level, each with 2 having fire, 2 light, and 1 capable of both to help bridge things, there'd be a decent potential to create illusions and manipulate their temperature to an extent where you could have things that by all accounts looked like real people except for the moment you touched them. As long as the temperature was regulated properly, keeping any heat from seeping out beyond the confines of the illusion, then it should be enough to melt anything like an unenchanted sword or armor, let alone what it could do to flesh. This time she had to admit the answer impressed her, all of the more so for the diagram he'd pulled from nowhere, even if she did feel the need to push back against it just a little. Saying ritual magic is a way to push it seems a little unreasonable given the rarity of that particular technique, not to mention the issue that is keeping it running long enough to be effective. The fact that it's rare doesn't make me any less right, even if it was just the first idea off the top of my head, and any spell takes practice. Just because that one takes a little more doesn't mean it wouldn't be useful, especially if there was a team of mages acting in tandem for any reason. Her eyes were gleaming with the talk, enjoying every second of it as she decided to forego grabbing a book for the next one, instead directly asking about his thoughts on any intersecting point between life, dark, and water, picking 3 at random just to hear where he thought they would be applicable and seeing him answer without missing a beat, handing over yet another sheet of paper with books he recommended on the topic, as well as how he could personally see himself using them in tandem before she switched things up again, not asking how different affinities could be used together, but giving him specific problems and asking how he would use different spells to solve them, seeing him get more drawn into the conversation as well as he focused on her, an answer on his lips to every question asked while the time ticked by. Eventually, she had to admit it to herself. She'd come out of curiosity given what Olavi had told her, but she'd somehow fallen into testing him in all seriousness, finding him to be in no way lacking. If he was cocky for saying he could be tested on anything, then he deserved to be. He clearly understood magic on a level that only a few others she'd spoken to had. There was no way she would deny him his access to the 4th and 5th floors, though a small part of her didn't want to leave things like that. Even if in just a small way, she wanted to stump him before she gave him the good news, and her thoughts went back to the document she'd read only a little earlier. "You certainly know your stuff," she told him. "So just one last question. If you wanted to quarter the mana cost of the enchantment for any singular gate being built on the network, how would you do it?" For just a second, he looked somewhere between confused and amused, and she thought she'd stumped him, right until he handed over another paper, outlining a condensed version of the one she'd just read, leaving out some of the technical elements but showing not only a blend of all affinities along with plain mana, but the unique enchanting system used with it, leaving her to gawk. How could you possibly have this? She knew it wasn't widely available yet, making her think he must have been some high-ranking member of the Mages Guild who for whatever reason just hadn't bothered taking her test beforehand. But instead she was told something so very different. "It would be weirder if I didn't, given that I'm the one who figured it out. You pass." "I'm sorry. You were looking to get access to the last 2 floors, right? You've passed. Come along." I'll update your card. Being told that, he finally had the confirmation he'd been waiting for when she first came to question him like so many others had, yet picking at his sacrilege in a way only Yuzu and Elvit had before. The woman before him was obviously a Tier 3 skill holder in his eyes, and had just confirmed that she was the same one he'd been waiting to test him as she gave the good news. So you're the head of this place? The one and only. I'm Killy. We can talk a bit more once we get you sorted. Having his suspicions confirmed made sense of why her questions had managed to be more interesting than so many others he'd dealt with, not to mention how she'd had thought to ask about the gates. She must have looked over the plans he'd submitted and actually had a reasonably deep knowledge of what was on each floor, but none of that mattered to him compared to the most important thing of all. Another Tier 3 skill holder. And she wants to talk more a bit after. She wouldn't mind me taking a peek, right? I'm sure this will be fine. He hadn't bothered reading her mind during their little exchange but connected to her as they walked to take a look at her skills, finding the one that made her what she was immediately. Embodiment of knowledge. A Tier 3 knowledge skill. Oh my god, I'm so jealous. Of course, who knows, I might not be that far off myself. He'd already made it to the 4th level of his own awakened knowledge skill, the sheer volume of information he was forcing into his head making it an inevitability. He'd been spending the days he had been waiting for his test learning as much as he could, and it seemed it was paying off in a big way, with it becoming his second highest skill in the short time since it had awakened. With the speed, it would continue to grow depending on the range of information he received. Hellori had already told him that at the rate he was reading at, it was actually leveling rather slowly, a result of the topic not being broad enough as his level grew. Right now he was learning about magic at a depth he never had in the past, but the knowledge skill covered all information, not just the narrow slice he was currently digging into. Which means I really should try and find out wherever all of the books from Craftsman's Tower are being stored, and maybe I should read up on some other topics I don't know much about either. And if I ever get around to decoding the archive then that's sure to help. Actually, on the topic of language, I feel like learning another one of those ridiculous so-called languages myriads people would use to communicate would probably be insane enough to raise my level. No, not worth it. Besides, as handy as his knowledge skill was, it wasn't something he considered one of his core ones. That right was reserved for all of his awakened crafting-type skills, along with unnatural mind. Those were the abilities that made him who he was, and they were the ones most worth developing. Of course, having said that, I'm still definitely asking how she awakened her knowledge skill if I get the chance. I absolutely want the bonuses to my attributes and lifespan that getting a 3rd-tier skill would give me. He let his thoughts wander some more as he went along with Killy, seeing her add the new mark to his card as the other surrounding librarians congratulated him before she again led him, taking him up each floor. So as I'm sure you know, the 1st floor deals with the more common Tier 1 magics, along with related information that isn't necessarily magical in nature, all of which is found on not only this floor, but the surrounding buildings as well. Of course, those other buildings also contain information that is more related to some of the other floors we'll pass, but was deemed less relevant and therefore not kept in the main building. The 2nd floor is where things get a bit more exciting if I do say so myself, with the information leaning to how different branches of magic can join to create different results. Floor 3 continues the trend, though it starts getting works on awakened magics too. Not that I need to tell you that. Am I correct in believing you read through that entire one? Ah, yeah. But I was able to learn a lot. He'd only finished it because his thought speed skill kept rising to greater heights, with him having gained yet another level just the day before, right before he went down a floor for more reading. When he used it, it already felt like nothing in the world was really moving if he wasn't paying close attention, only the pages he was forcing to turn, needing to use tighter and tighter bits of mana to be sure he wouldn't use up his supply and pass out from exhaustion. But all of that was already proving its worth. He'd need to read up on all of the findings his research organization had managed to pull while examining the summoning spell, but he was sure he was already making connections that could be relevant to that massive project. Of course, I've also found plenty of contradicting info in all of that. He thought with a sigh. Makes sense. I'm not sure if the Mages Guild even has anything like a peer review process. Maybe something else to try and introduce to the world in the future. For now, I'll just try and keep track of what's blatantly wrong and move from there. Killy continued as some of his minds focused on those thoughts, until they finally made it to the 4th floor, so clearly smaller than the others due to the building's slanted walls, yet containing some of the most valuable information if it was to be believed. And here we get to the most valuable books on awakened magics, along with some other topics. Theories on spell crafting and mana in general, observations about the world that seem magical in nature but haven't been confirmed, and ideas that there's currently no way to test, even if by all measures we believe they are accurate. In short, largely theory in the hopes of inspiring beyond what is currently possible. Interesting, there could be a few neat things up here. Then that just leaves the last. Undoubtedly the one he was most excited for of everyone he was allowed access to. The 5th floor of the library and whatever secrets it might contain, with Killy looking just as excited despite how often she'd surely been there. It was the smallest section of all, having far less than he would have expected given the size of the place, only a few shelves and plenty of reading space, with tables and couches of all sizes for people to make use of as they worked. At least that was what it seemed like it should have been for, but it was essentially empty. He could see one person working away off to the side, their back to them, but that was the end of it. His eyes lingered on the man, feeling his sacrilege call to him but suppressed it. As instantly curious as it made him, he wasn't there to bother anyone with their studies. At least not till I'm done with Killy. Maybe I'll try and catch the guy if it looks like he's leaving later. Still, I guess there aren't enough people who make it up here for it to be crowded. God, I can feel myself getting more and more excited here. So that brings us to the top, the crown jewel of our library. You will find books on 2 topics here. The signature spells of famous mages throughout history, written by themselves as they've been developed into something wholly their own in the hopes that future generations would continue refining them or else be inspired by them. Well, realistically a lot of them are here as a way for the mages who made them to brag and act as a challenge for others, but we'll take the more optimistic idea of these, shall we? Ha, sure. And the other topic. As much as it might surprise you, not strictly magical at all. Here we have a record of every 3rd-tier skill to have ever existed in the world, written either by the skill holders themselves, or else records gathered from those who observed them. Of course, given how the gods try to ensure the world always has a soul mage, you could easily consider this floor to be a record of soul magic and the spells it can be used for as well. A few of the cases alone are specifically on the topic, but that isn't really the main purpose of the floor. Oh, and there's also information on some changes and options different 3rd-tier skill holders have gained after reaching such a point. Every now and then you'll see one giving more bonuses to an attribute than it should, and we also have information on some of the jobs that would be unlocked when getting to that level. He felt himself drooling just thinking about it. Some of the rarest knowledge in the world at his fingertips, just waiting to be dug through. If he insisted on reading at his maximum capacity like he had on the 3rd floor, then he'd be out in minutes, but he wanted to savor everything he read there, taking each bit in. I'll at least spend 2 hours here. He and his homunculi were already starting to make their way over without him giving any conscious thought to the act, only stopping as Killy cleared her throat. Ah, sorry, you said you wanted to talk, right? My bad. Ha! Don't worry, I understand the feeling. I can arrange another time with you if you'd prefer. No, please, now works perfectly fine by me. He now had permanent access to the floor, but that wasn't true of the 3rd-tier skill holder running the place. He would be a fool to miss out on picking her brain while he had the chance. Excellent. In that case, I do believe I spy my student up here as well. Why don't introduce you? I'm sure it would be a valuable meeting for you both. She was already leading him to the only occupied table before he agreed. Not that he minded. If it was a chance to deepen his connection with her, hopefully opening the door to exchanging more words in the future, then he would take it. It was as simple as that. It was clear the two weren't of the same species, Killy being a member of a 4-armed race, while the one with their head buried in a book, not even seeing the two of them standing in front of him, looking significantly more human, basically a perfect match for his own kind if it weren't for the fact that both his hair and eyes were a bright pink color, rousing his memories. I've seen a couple of his species recently. I definitely helped a few of them raise their levels through forcing materialization, but beyond that, both he and Killy really are scratching at my sacrilege the exact same way. He really might be. He didn't get the chance to complete the thought before Killy lightly tapped the young man's head, making him jump despite the small touch as his bright eyes moved to focus on the two of them standing before him, along with the four of Ben's homunculi. Verbum. I'm glad I caught you here. This is Dash. Her words were cut off as Verbum's eyes took on a look of deep terror, a scream erupting from his throat as he launched himself from his seat, throwing himself down the stairs with no regard for his safety, as the two of them were left wondering just what the hell had happened to get a reaction like that. So is this a common occurrence? Ben asked, trying to be polite despite the numerous questions the reaction had filled his head with, all while Killy was busy rubbing her own. Well, he startles easily and is a bit of a worrier, but this was definitely more extreme than usual. Gods above. Just what could have set that boy off now? He noticed the keyword now, hinting that there were surely other events like that one, even if potentially less random, but didn't have much time to think on it. As he was taking a second to figure out where to steer the conversation after such a thing, his thoughts were interrupted by the sounds of feet as the guards stationed at the beginning of each staircase rushed up in a desperate bid to get to the top, 10 of them with spells on their fingertips, ready to fire. Oh, I really don't like whatever's happening here. He pushed the majority of his minds to the limits of their speed as he watched spells fire, light and dark as what looked like a wall sprung up around him and his homunculi. At least it would have appeared so if his resistances weren't so high. With them being what they were, he was able to see through it with ease, getting to watch as the rest of the guards threw themselves forward with one giving orders from the background. Sleep didn't work. Focus on protecting Miss Killy. Hit him with a drain spell. That one hit him before the rest got close enough, clearly ready to fire before the order was given, with a result he could at least feel. His life force was draining, albeit slower than he was sure any of them expected, all while he was left thinking of what to do. Everyone was moving too fast for him to get a word in, but at the same time he was able to think at a speed that left them moving in slow motion, giving him the leeway to consider his next move. Okay, I'm a decent 80% sure I'm completely innocent of any wrongdoing here, so let's just keep myself safe and try not to escalate things. It looks like they either don't have or won't use more physical magics, probably to protect the books, and I can deal with this level of drain for a while. That just leaves the 3 that are about to appear through the illusion to try and punch me in the face. They didn't know he could see them, and it was ultimately what led to their downfall. Ben didn't even need to move to protect himself. All he did was carefully watch as each one ran, waiting with how slow their movements looked in his eyes for their feet to get as close together as they could before he materialized his mana, a strong metal chain binding each of their legs together and bringing them to the ground. All of that only pumped their fears. He was showing no effect from the drain or sleep spells being cast on him and had just taken out the 3 with combat skills without moving a muscle. Just what had they been told to deal with? Ben, for his part, spent what felt like a minute to him feeling overwhelmingly smug before trying to actually deal with the situation. Not so easy to kill anymore, am I? Getting pegged in the face with that snowball before was just a fluke. There was nobody to answer his regained sense of pride, nor did he need it. After letting himself enjoy that small sense of victory, he carefully sculpted his expression before he spoke up. The bit of smugness he let himself feel before being nothing but a flicker across his lips, so fast that no one watching would have picked up on it. So, before we go on, can I at least be told why you're all attacking me? He asked, trying to sound calm. I'm pretty certain I haven't done anything wrong. Even as Killy took her distance, watching him through cautious eyes, she couldn't help but agree, especially since it didn't seem like Ben had any intention of causing harm or escalating things. All he'd done was protect himself. The most injuries anyone had sustained were bruises from falling to the floor. What's this all about? What did Verbum see to deserve such a reaction? It was the one who'd been giving orders at the back who spoke up, staff in hand and obviously considering casting something slightly more dangerous. It's his status, there's Dash. Wait, Killy said, cutting him off and pinching her brow. All of this wasn't because of something in the boy's history, but his status of all things? You must be joking. Haven't I told everyone not to take my idiot students' worries so seriously? If you're going to attack everyone with something a little complicated in their status, then you'll be attacking hundreds. It's not just one thing, ma'am. another guard said. We were told that there's specifically 16 points of major concern, spread across 9 titles, 5 jobs, and 2 skills, though we didn't get anything more specific beyond that he's extraordinarily powerful. I'm sorry, how many titles? She asked, looking at Ben with renewed concern as his mask slipped just enough to give away his cheer. Aw, shucks. I don't know if I would say extraordinarily powerful, he told them. But I do manage pretty well for myself, I guess. Either way, if everyone is willing to not attack me, I'll explain pretty much any point of concern you all have. So can we please be cool? Even as he was saying it though, his mind was working in a completely different direction. The man from before, Verbum, had seen his status. Sure, Ben and the Soul Mages could as well, but that really just pointed to one specific thing outside of those outliers. An awakened analysis skill. Hello, new best friend. Killy motioned the guards to stand down, taking a far calmer look as she did. All right, I'm sorry for the inconvenience, but if you don't mind then I'd appreciate it. One-off, you stay with me. The rest of you get back to your regular work. But Miss Dash, even if it is my student's fault, the library has just attacked a person on no grounds other than the status they bear, she told them coldly. And seeing as how nobody was harmed beyond some small bruises when he obviously had the advantage, we will be treating him with all due respect, especially considering he's willing to talk through the very things that just got him attacked. Am I being clear? Yes, ma'am, they said in unison. Good. And while you're at it, find my student and send him back to me in a bit. It seems that after all of these years, he still needs to be further educated. With that, they left back to their respective posts. Only the one who seemed to be the leader was staying with them as they went to take a seat at the table, Ben first sitting his homunculi down and leaving them out of his range as he was looked at curiously for the act. I can only use them if they're close enough to me, he explained. I figured this would make everyone a bit more comfortable anyway. Now, I'm going to reach into my pocket and get my card out. Nothing nefarious, so no trying to attack me, please. He moved slowly, trying to make it clear he meant no harm and had no ulterior goals as he pulled it out and activated it before sliding it across the table to let them both see the information it contained as their eyes skimmed over it all, one doing significantly more to hide their expression than the other. Well, this is impressive, Killy muttered, taking in the sheer volume present on his card, as well as making connections for what different bits meant. More like concerning, the guard, One-Oth said, looking ready to fire a spell again. I can't begin to imagine a reasonable explanation for half of this. You can't just assume guilt from a person's status, especially since it appears the status in question belongs to an apostle. I apologize for the inconvenience, Ben, but if you don't mind, they were both seeing it in very different ways, with One-Oth seeing the same things that had driven Verbum to run away, while Killy was evaluating it against things she'd heard about in the last few years, immediately knowing who he was from the apostle title and the presence of the dead god's trial being marked, along with his many blessings and other positive titles that went with it. Sure, just do me a favor and don't go spreading this around, please. This is my second time being attacked for my status and it doesn't get any better. You have my assurance that nothing either of us see will be spread. At this point, it's just for our peace of mind. While not looking happy about it, the guard nodded, letting Ben begin. All right, pretty much all of this can be verified by the gods, so if you aren't happy, go talk to the communal church and I'll get Myriad to sort it out. Godslayer, Madman, Monster, Godkiller, and Threat, along with my skill, King of Sacrilege, are all related to the forbidden gods. Since you have a tier 3 skill, I'm assuming you got one of the potions made from them. I did. Well, I'm the one who acted as their executioner for their crimes. Killing 5 gods got me to that level, and let's just say they were feeling pretty free with the titles they were granting as it was happening. He didn't feel the need to explain that he had some levels of sacrilege beforehand, thinking it would only complicate things as he went on. As for the jobs, I'm assuming it was Heretic, Divine Heretic, Infernal Craftsman, Profane Enchanter, and Impious Creator. The first 2 I took for the previously mentioned executions on the grounds that if I was going to have to deal with all of the issues of levels and titles that came from killing them since you don't get to see the context, I might as well use the opportunity to grow as much as I could after. The latter 3 are jobs that are related to both the Heretic branch and the other advanced paths I follow, But because I got to see just how good the attribute bonuses were for Divine Heretic, I wanted to keep going with it to grow even more, because of the whole world ending and impending doom thing. Other than that, the demon skill is because of an organ transplant to save my life, which is again verifiable by both the gods, as well as the current queen of Anila, who I want to mention just for funsies is my mother-in-law. Again, he wasn't stretching the truth so much as just making it fit a bit nicer, but he didn't want to spend hours giving the backstory of his life. He'd done nothing really wrong and all of that was easily provable, so the sooner he got the conversation over with, the sooner he could do what he really wanted, picking at the minds of both Kili and her student to get all he could. His last statement establishing his relationship with Pelania had clearly shaken the two of them, coming out of left field as something that couldn't be seen in the form of a skill or a title on his card, but One-Oth still wanted to hear the rest. And the rest of the titles, then? God, I'm guessing he was probably talking about Enemy of Aneth, the Mad Apostle, God of Destruction, and I have no clue what the last one would be. Either way, the first two of those stems from the fact that I don't respect the gods as higher powers. You don't respect the gods? One-Oth asked, the professionalism slipping at that. You're an apostle. As higher powers, I said. I respect them on the same grounds as people. If a god is acting like a dick, then I'll treat them as such, no matter how they might feel about that. I suppose that probably stems from you being human, Kili nodded. I really wasn't expecting to meet another one of the summoned like this. She'd known what he was the moment she'd read his card, but for so much to be on it after just a few years on the planet, she could only imagine the life he'd been living to get it to that point, not to mention the skills he had. She may not have known that he didn't arrive with the awakened skills of the others, and she understood that his sacrilege was clearly sped through as a result of the unique circumstance that killing so many gods had granted. But that still left 3 other skills he had to have awakened solely through his own efforts. Ben, for his part, wasn't shocked that someone with a 3rd-tier knowledge skill would know who he was from the name of his species alone, even if having it revealed did leave him feeling a bit uncomfortable, which he did his best to ignore as he went on. Anyway, as for the last 2, I'm going to be honest. God of Destruction is way too complicated for me to explain, so if you really want context on that one too, you should again go to the communal church to get a priest to ask a god, and I don't know what the last one he considered so bad is, so I don't know how to help with that. Oh, I'm sure it has to do with one of your trial titles, she said. But seeing as how you have the Trial of the Dead God listed on your card, I understand the context of how you got both. One-Oth, I believe we've confirmed enough. We still haven't verified any of his explanations, he tried to argue, only for Kili to wave him away. Then you can go do that, but I'm satisfied. Ben, I understand this may have been a bit more unpleasant than you'd hoped, but I'd still love to chat with you if this whole experience hasn't put you off of the idea. Are you kidding? After all this, I'm going to be shameless in taking up your time. It was a thought he didn't dare speak aloud given that he really didn't hold poor feelings for either of them for just trying to be careful. Instead, he put on his best, least threatening smile as he looked her in the eyes. Of course it's no problem. I was hoping for this same opportunity. So, what were you looking to chat about? He asked, acting as if the last few minutes had never happened. I'm a fairly open book. So you've shown. I had been planning to inquire about your skills a bit anyway, just not in a situation like that. She sighed, looking apologetic as she did. So you really are a holder of the knowledge skill, and at a high level too. Not that that should be shocking given the speed I've seen you're able to process information. If you don't mind me asking, how did you go about applying your knowledge to actually awaken it? Materialization, he told her, creating a piece of paper from his raw mana. I did it in a particularly difficult way and it pushed the skill over the edge. Surprised the hell out of me too given how hard I've tried to awaken other skills, only to constantly fail at it. He started absent-mindedly folding the piece he made while she watched as he reminisced about just how unreasonably hard it had been to push Connect over the edge. Compared to that, awakening knowledge was nothing. I suppose that explains how you had notes and diagrams to answer each of my questions with too. But still very impressive. I've never heard of anyone doing it to such a level before. It's not hard as long as you have a deep knowledge of materials. If you had a magic that aligned with it, then you probably could too. At least for most things. Seed creation definitely takes a little more. A thin smile stretched across her lips as she considered the prospect herself. Perhaps, but there's not much point in considering something that won't happen. Anyway, I won't go sticking my nose into anything I have no business knowing, seeing as you've already revealed plenty of your personal information. But one thing I was hoping to ask you about was your goals. You wanted to get full access to the library. Now that you have it, what are you working towards? I personally wouldn't mind helping point you in the right direction if I can. He felt his eyes light up at the offer. In the end, there were a bunch of different goals he had, but only one felt achievable at the moment and would act as a path for others if he managed it. I'm trying to break into making legendary items, so I need to know more about magic as a whole, or at least that's the approach I'm taking for it. I can keep refining my technical skill for the things I make, but beyond that I need to construct powerful enchantments to push things even further. He knew he had to be close. He now had a pile of skill rings made from awakened skills specifically, along with the technical ability to pull it off, but in his attempts before leaving for the magic towers, all he'd gotten was failure. He just needed whatever was missing to make it click. And once I'm properly on that track, I'll be in an even better place to build Onyx's body, plus everything I'm learning here might have a decent path for everything I'm learning for the summoning spell. God, I feel like I'm on the edge of so much, just waiting for the day I pass over it. She could see the hope and confidence in his eyes as he looked at her, thinking about the dreams he wanted to achieve, but they were expectations she needed to dash, much as it pained her to do so. I see. Sadly, crafting isn't my forte, so I don't actually think I could provide a reasonable level of guidance that might help you, she told him, sounding more annoyed with herself than anything. I might be able to suggest ideas for where you could aim with your enchantments, but I suspect it would be more worth your time to keep doing what you're already doing. It's not like it will take you too long to read everything we have on these floors, as well, so I'm sure it will be worth your time. Ah, that tracks. I guess being the embodiment of knowledge doesn't mean you just know everything. He sighed, not noticing the strange look he was getting. I suppose I can't be annoyed that you know the name of my skill given what we just put you through, but I really would rather like to know how you learned that. Is it not widely known that you're a third-tier skill holder? Yes, and for the knowledge skill, but not the specifics of its name. Oops, looks like I've shown my hand a bit. My skills divine enchanting and deep connection pair to let me see the skills of others if I'm close enough, he admitted. I knew you had one at the third tier, but I didn't know in what, so I took a peek. Sorry. It's fine. Like I said, how can I complain when my student insists on doing the same thing? Cool. 'Cause in that case, I have a different question for you. How did you get to the third tier? I've gotta know. If he was going to keep raising his knowledge skill, then his chances of it were high, at least compared to his other options, and he wanted an idea of what it took to break through, but again he got a complicated look. It's not exactly a simple matter. Along with studying magics as a whole, I'm well versed in a number of other fields, so I'll often go to act as a consultant or investigator depending on the demands. Raising the knowledge skill is largely through learning, but in the same way as gaining it in the first place, you also need to constantly be applying your knowledge. While some break through the barrier through great acts, mine was just an uncountable number of smaller ones, all of which slowly chipped away at the wall until I could pass through. So similar to what Fox been trying to do then, only it looks like she succeeded at it. Interesting. I wonder how many years of dedicated work that took. I suppose as long as I'm alive, I can work on getting there myself one day, but it's still really not a priority. Oh well, I'm still a ways away from really needing to think about that, he sighed. I can just put my brain to it if I ever get there. It was obvious that Killy not only felt bad, but her pride was hurt as well. She'd usually chat with anyone who passed the tests for the 4th and 5th floors, doing what she could to help with their goals from her vast supply of knowledge. But on both of his questions she'd failed to give anything that could actually be of use, not that she wasn't going to quit there. There was no telling when anyone would actually find wherever her student had hidden himself away, and she still wanted the two to meet, meaning she had all of that time to find some topic she might aid in. Is there nothing else? She insisted. If you don't have more interests of a magical nature, then you really could get plenty from any standard library. Surely you have one or two goals or areas of study that align with the study of magic overall. He thought for a second before spending his mana, not creating a single page this time but instead a dense book, bringing him near the bottom of his reserves but succeeding thanks to the large bit of his mental power that made it possible. "Well, I suppose there is one more thing that takes up a fair bit of my interest," he told her, handing it over and seeing her eyes shine at the display of technique and control. "I'm trying to deconstruct and simplify the most complex spell I'm aware of, and I sure wouldn't say no to some help." That she thought she could do. Even without knowing the spell, that was a direct application of knowledge, her specialty. She was flipping through the pages as soon as she got it, ready to do whatever she could, only to end up at a loss. "Just what sort of spell is this?" "The one that summoned me and the rest to this world." "Well, technically that's just diagrams of how mana flows for a few fragments of it, but the thing is ridiculous and still being studied, so I'll take any insights you think you could give." She flipped through it all again and took it for what it felt like. A challenge. She couldn't begin to figure out how to approach it, but that was just a problem to be solved, and one she planned on doing with gusto. It was an hour later a guard came up, carrying Verbum over his shoulder as he tried to get away, kicking and screaming and doing everything he could to put up a hell of a fight, clearly stronger than he looked but not used to using that strength, unable to escape the hold he was in. "Verbum, be quiet," Killy told him, not sparing a glance and instead entirely focused on the notes she was working on as she spoke to Ben. "So I would think that the effects being caused in diagram 11C are the same ones responsible for the changes in 38X, which would imply that both are being affected not by any earlier changes, but somehow the later ones seen in 11F and 38V. But the only way that would make sense is if that mana is looping back in on itself through these paths." "I think you're right," Ben agreed, already feeling the depths of her insight and couldn't help but be pleased that he'd take the chance to ask. "There are plenty of other sections I'd be able to compare to when I get home, so if you're right then at least a part of it just got a little more predictable." It felt like the mountain he'd been throwing himself against had just budged, the overwhelming obstacle that was breaking across reality giving way to their collective thinking. There was still plenty to do, but every step was a bit closer and he already felt his thoughts exploding with new ideas to be tested, just from seeing the way Killy approached the problem. For as many minds as he had to put to any challenge now, it only showed that he was still one man. Others would always see things in ways he couldn't, potentially to excellent results such as that. "Who knows, maybe my staff will have had a few good ideas by the time I'm back as well." Miss Killy, why did you insist on having me dragged back here?" Verbum asked, even if he couldn't help but feel safer being ignored as he kept up his struggle against the guard's grip. "If I'm not needed, I think I'll leave for somewhere a little safer. Like under a rock, or maybe in a bunker dash." "Verbum, you will sit here and you will like it. First things first, apologize to Ben. How many times are you going to react to someone's status like that? I've told you time and again to not look at what anyone has like that anyway. So I'm not the first one then? Okay, that does make me feel a little better." "Killy, if you knew what he has dash," he started trying to argue, only to be cut off. "Since you raised such a ruckus about it, Ben was very open about his status in explaining how each bit came to pass. I'll admit, it does seem troubling at first glance, however. One-Off has already gone to confirm, and the fact he hasn't come running back means the answer is clear enough. Judge people by the actions you see, not some characteristic marked on their soul. You can't just blindly trust the things you see," he muttered darkly. "Sure, your eyes might tell you you're amongst friends. But then, the masks come off and your world is conquered before you even knew it. Or you were always ruled from the start and being raised like animals without even knowing it. Okay, I can definitely see that this guy has some issues. Maybe I don't want to be best friends with him for his awakened analysis after all." Killy seemed to agree plenty about the issue her student possessed. "Verbum, I understand where this comes from. I really do. But for now calm down and you can worry about anything else later after you actually talk to Ben. I believe you'll get along quite well if you just put all of these worries aside briefly. You both have plenty in common. Not only does he also have the knowledge skill and is doing his best to grow it, but as another one of the summoned I'm sure he'd be worth getting to know if you actually gave it a chance before jumping to wild conclusions." Another one? Suddenly it made sense when he recognized his race, as well as why he'd been helping so many of them try to level magics that had already awakened. Like his group, 20 had come to the world with him, and now here was another standing by his side. acting as the student of one of the world's Tier 3 skill holders with all of the resources that implied. And I changed my mind yet again. Just you wait, you paranoid loony. We're gonna get on great in the name of me taking advantage of whatever interesting skills you came with. Immediately, Ben wanted to confirm he was right about what he was feeling and reached out with Connect, linking with the man and letting him see the skills on his soul, finding exactly what he'd been expecting. A Tier 3 skill, albeit one that didn't have a level so it couldn't grow, meaning he was sitting beside one of the more valuable of the summoned on the planet. All that left was just what it did. Akashic record, huh? He muttered, getting to see Verbum almost jump out of his skin while Killy chided him. You are not allowed to react poorly to someone else peeking on your soul if you're going to do it to everyone around you as well. And yes, Ben, he's the holder of a Tier 3 skill like myself. To be specific, he is the first holder of a Tier 3 analysis. Okay, stay calm and be casual and cool. Don't want to go scaring him off more than he already is. Killy, can I leave now? Verbum tried to beg. He's looking at me like I'm a piece of meat. Rude. I'm looking at you like you're a friend waiting to happen. Like your teacher said, I was also one of the summoned from the human group, so let's get along. He held out his hand, only for it to be regarded with suspicion, with the other only taking it when it seemed his teacher was about to lose patience. Verbums from the Pleiadian group. It was a name that scratched at his memories, even if he didn't immediately know why. He really hadn't taken as much interest in the other groups of summoned as he probably should have. He hadn't even bothered to learn the name of Yuzu's species. The only two he knew with certainty were humans and the Grey. Although that isn't exactly true, is it? He thought to himself, understanding dawning on him. I technically met an Orion even if I didn't talk to her, and wasn't it the Pleiadians who were the ones that got to deal with that shock when they arrived? The shock being the discovery that they'd been secretly ruled by another race. The Orions, a group of lizard people who had somehow hidden their entire species from a planet of others, ruling them in secret for reasons Ben couldn't begin to guess at. All at once, Ben couldn't help but feel sympathy for the other man as his nervous nature made more sense. If he'd had to learn about the existence of the Grey watching his world and playing their pranks at the same time he was dealing with accepting the fact that he'd died and been given a new life specifically to fight in an impossible war, there was a good chance he wouldn't have been in a great spot either. It also left the problem of not knowing where to take the conversation from there. What am I even supposed to say here? How was it living in a society built on the biggest lie you could imagine? Do you chat with the two Orions that were brought here with you? Or do you keep your distance? How did the rest of your kind take the reveal? Lucky for him, he didn't need to make that choice. Killy did it for him. Verbum's people came here under, let's say, unique circumstances which can leave him a little cautious, but since you're both holders of the knowledge skill along with being otherworlders, I thought it might be a worthwhile experience for you to get the chance to talk. Different ideas can grow into incredible things when they meet after all. I'm aware about the whole secret ruling species, Ben admitted. Honestly, must have been a shock, but I can kind of get how you feel. Have you heard of the Grey? They were watching my world from a whole other reality, and instead of making themselves known, they would just pull pranks on us by appearing to crazy people. Well, I guess maybe not crazy people since they were right, but you get my point. He said it to try and commiserate together, to have a common point of interest that might help unite them, but that failed too, and spectacularly so. They were doing the same to my world too, he said, hanging his head back with a dead look in his eyes. Secretly ruled on my world, secretly watched from another reality, dragged into this one by higher powers my people never even conceived of, just so I can die all over again. I'm just waiting for whatever's next. Maybe this multiverse is being observed by some greater omniverse, or maybe everything is just a simulation and whoever's running it decided to be mean to me in particular. Hell, maybe none of you even exist and this is all an extension of my own disembodied nightmares torturing me. I think you could at least verify some of that with your analysis skill, right? Or does it not work like that? How am I supposed to trust an ability I got in this reality if I'm not even confident anything exists? He yelled back. For all I know, something else just gave it to me to give me a false sense of security. On one hand, a little paranoid, but on the other, I still don't really think I can blame him. Killy seemed to be faced with the same predicament. She was placed in charge of helping him learn and grow due to the compatibility of their skills. But she couldn't do anything for the doubts and fears that plagued his mind. Ahem, the way his analysis skill works is it lets him see all of the information the system contains on anything he desires. Allegedly. Based on everything we can see about it, she went on, ignoring the interjection. It's honestly probably the most powerful information-gathering tool on the planet given how it is, but unless one is specific about it, it can provide too much information, so he's still practicing trying to refine what he gets to the most important bits. Interesting, Ben said, trying not to show his naked desire and opting to make some small talk before he got to the heart of what he wanted to know. So do you think you got that and your knowledge skill based on anything you did in your first life? I was aiming to be an artist, which might explain my 3 blessed ones, and I know others whose skills matched things they would do. But then plenty of people arrived with magic skills despite nothing like that existing on my planet. I was training to be a rememberer, Verbum told them, more life draining from his eyes as he did. A rememberer? One who's trained from childhood to remember the history of my people and learn the lessons it contains. Except none of that matters since it was apparently all a lie and I've been wasting my life. The table fell silent with the bleak statement as Ben did his best to hold back a sigh. Okay, I'm never getting anywhere with this guy, so I think I'm just going to jump down the deep end. So when you use your skill, how do you get information from it? He asked forcefully, not giving room for another depressing rabbit hole. Is the knowledge forced into your head, or do you hear it or read it? For the limited form of analysis that Ben had from both his crafting and enchanting, it appeared in a visual form, the characters of the world's language appearing in his vision when he wanted them to, but he didn't know for sure if that was the case for a proper analysis skill, least of all one that had made it to the 3rd tier. I read it. Why? Score. As you've already seen, I have plenty of jobs, skills, and titles I would want more information on than the system will usually provide, and it just so happens that one of my skills can let me see through the eyes of others. What do you say, want to give me a look? Without meaning to, he'd started leaning towards the other man, with Verbum's dead expression changing to one of meek fear under that predatory gaze. Like Killy said, there's too much information, you wouldn't be able to get anything out of it, he told him, wanting to flee with all he had. Oh, that won't be a problem for me. I guess you didn't look too deeply, but my absolute thought speed and unnatural mind would make it a breeze. Come on. Don't be scared and give it a try. He was already connected to him, looking through his eyes in the hopes he would do it, if just to see more on the skills he had just said, but Verbum was too focused on the look on Ben's face, and before he knew it the visual connection was broken, not through any intent from either party, but instead a result of the fear becoming too much for the Pleiadian, making him black out where he sat. Oops. Oops. He spoke, voice sheepish at what he'd just caused, not having any intent for things to end in such a way. Is he going to be okay? It's fine. This wouldn't be the first time, Killy told him, lacking anything remotely akin to concern. More importantly, is what you just said true? Can you see through the eyes of others? It's how I've been using my homunculi to read so much. Interesting, she muttered before focusing on him almost as deeply as he had on Verbum. Ben, let me make you an offer for a trade. I saw on your card you're a rank 1 adventurer. Unfortunately, though I'm not actually skilled enough to deserve the rank and got it on a technicality. You successfully handled 10 of our guards in a fight. They may not be the best of the best, but they aren't exactly slouches either. True. Honestly, between my magic and all of my mind skills now, I might actually be more fit for the role than I was when I was first forced to take it. All right. What's your interest in my rank? He asked cautiously, wondering where this could possibly be going. I mentioned already that part of my role is to investigate different things and phenomena, a role my student happens to have the skill set to excel at. The issue is that he's like this. She gestured broadly at his unconscious form before continuing. I've been taking him around with me while I work, but he needs experience with other people too, or else he's never going to manage in the world. I was hoping you'd be willing to go with him to a few different regions to deal with what should hopefully be some quicker investigations. Are you sure you're not just asking me so you can have a break? Irrelevant. The point is, if you do, I will ensure he'll use his skill for you. It shouldn't be that hard to convince him, and given how fast you seem to read, it wouldn't take long to go through your entire status. It was a tempting offer, but one he honestly thought he could get out of the man on his own with just a bit of work. He wanted to sweeten the deal for himself. I'm told the library has a basement too. What are the odds I could have access to that thrown in too if I do this? None. The basement is only available during specific circumstances, one of which being permission from the gods. Nobody in the world is allowed casual access to it. Not even me. Oh God, that just makes me want it even more. Still, he didn't think she was lying, so he couldn't force things for her. Not when he really wanted to maintain a good relationship with her for the future. Just picking her brain on that bit of the summoning spell had helped tremendously. He didn't want to lose that connection. All right, I'm not against it, but I need to discuss the matter with my partner, he explained. I wouldn't be going without her. Romantic or adventuring partner? Both. Her rank. Also one. Interesting, Killy muttered. Does she have any skills that would be useful for travel? Ideally space magic. All of these locations are in the Untamed Lands, and many of them are quite far away from anything else. No space magic, but she's a powerful earth mage and can use it to fly an entire cart full of people through the air. Slower than space magic, obviously, but it's the next best thing. And does she use the library? Vasta and Yuliel got her access to the 3rd floor, same as me, but she didn't care about taking any additional tests. She seemed to think for a minute, mentally passing over options before she came to a conclusion. Okay, if the two of you would be willing to, I'll throw in access to the 4th floor to her. How does that sound? It sounded mildly like an abuse of authority, even if he wasn't going to say it, along with the question of if there was even a point. He'd be able to read over everything up there in just a few days and from there use his magic to make a perfect copy of any book he thought might be useful to her. Why would she need access to the floor? Of course, that's also not for me to decide. She should be reading on the 3rd floor right now. If you don't mind, I'll talk it over with her. All right, and if it's all the same to you, I'll tag along, lest I be reamed for entrusting him to someone I haven't at least met. He had no reason to argue, so he didn't, leading the way downstairs to talk things over with Thera, leaving the unconscious Verbum at the table to wake at his own convenience. Thera's agreement was swift. How could she decline? Even if she didn't care too much about advancing farther into the library, this was a request to them as Rank 1 adventurers, off to protect one of the most important figures in the world. It was the sort of thing she dreamed of when she'd first started, now waiting to be fulfilled. It was obvious she was itching to take on the task now that it had been given, but they weren't exactly being rushed for it either. There were still a couple days to go before they needed to head out. Days Ben fully intended to put to use in the top floors of the library. His god sighed in his head as Ben flipped through the books on the 5th floor, taking them slower than he had on the 3rd to try and savor the wealth of knowledge they contained, even if it still left him going at an outrageous pace. Hey, I absolutely held my own, I'll have you know. I'm like properly powerful now. We're ignoring that. Instead, do me a favor and get me access to the basement. I want to know what's so special to be hidden away like that. He'd been told he needed permission from the gods, but he was someone lucky enough to be on good terms with more than a few. He was absolutely going to abuse that for all it was worth. Or at least he was going to try. Boo. Why not? I'm such a good little apostle who just helped the entire world become more powerful. I deserve this. Yeah, and if I'd known about how hard it was getting into the basement, then I would have tried to force that too. What's the big deal? Obviously, this is a library, Myriad. His god sighed. Hey, calling knowledge good or bad is close-minded. It all comes down to how you use it. I promise I wouldn't abuse anything I learn. So incredibly lame. He sighed as he put away all of the books on soul magic that floor contained, sitting back briefly to take it all in since it didn't seem he'd wear down his god. Even if he couldn't get that final floor, the 5th was already proving itself interesting enough for him from all of the texts on one particular 3rd-tier magic alone. A branch that so few had achieved, yet was largely responsible for so much of what the world had achieved thanks to the gods making sure there was always one on the planet. Even Ben couldn't help but think it almost seemed inherently noble. Soul magic. Sure, it kept its roots from the life and death it had originally grown from, but it was a magic that raised others in all ways. Beyond just helping to lower the difficulty in leveling skills, raising attributes, and breaking through tiers for the people lucky enough to feel its effects, it had other uses too, ones that managed to be impressive enough to catch him off guard. There were two he'd seen and heard of that surprisingly weren't in any of the books, both giving blessings and extending lifespans being largely considered rumors to keep any soul mage on the planet from being more bogged down and harassed than they already were. But they could do more beyond that. Much in a similar vein to Zandale, it seemed if they put their mind to it, they could help people acquire skills. From what he read, it still seemed that his fellow apostle was more suited to the task, his skills being specialized towards it, but they were matters of the soul, meaning it still fell within the domain of the soul mages, and more than that, it provided bonuses that Zandale couldn't. While the tentacled apostle could teach someone any of the numerous skills he knew, it looked like the soul mages operated slightly differently. They would instead prime a person's soul for learning, reducing the difficulty of gaining anything it seemed like they might acquire. It was less direct than Zandale's method, the target not being able to choose what would come of such a thing, but then it also gave the potential for a far greater range of skills to be achieved as well. And that's not even considering how things might turn out if the two were used together in tandem. I can already imagine people gaining Zandale's skills instantly if he had a soul mage by his side, which would be cool enough if there wasn't also that one signature skill to compare it against. It was a spell that captured Ben's imagination like no other. A soul mage from 1,000 years in the past had spent their life working on a way to essentially copy a skill that she saw from pure mana, attaching her new construct to the soul of another in the same way a god would grant them to their believers. I mean, it makes sense given that they can grant blessings too, but to achieve such a thing is still honestly incredible. I wonder if Yuzu or Elvit can too. Interesting, that does raise a good point. She has to be a god now, right? Any chance you could arrange a meeting so I could pick her brain? Wow, okay, never mind. Screw her then. Hey, I'm an absolute charmer. If she can't see that, then it's her loss. It was a disappointing answer, but it didn't matter too much. Even if she didn't like him, Ben wouldn't deny that her notes on the topic were exceptional. He doubted he could get any more from a conversation than he already had by reading about her process. Still, reading all of that couldn't help but make him long for soul magic himself. He was already imagining the things he would make if he were to get it, accessories that would assist in raising skills and attributes being the big ones, but others for helping people break through or acquire new skills captured his imagination as well. He was already imagining just how it would work, even if he knew it was never going to come to be. I can never get soul magic myself, and if I wanted to use someone else's, then that would mean awakening both enchanting and connect, which is just not happening. Maybe I could get really lucky and awaken both together into one new skill, but even still, the odds are low. It wasn't like he hadn't ever let himself imagine such things. Honestly, it was hard to stop himself from theorycrafting just how to push any over the edge if he ever got them high enough, but if he was being honest with himself, he really only thought there were a couple that had a slim chance. Despite being the newest to awaken, it was his knowledge skill that made it to the top of the list, given that raising it just meant learning as much as he could and then applying his knowledge enough to push it past its limits, something he genuinely believed might be possible, leaving the rest of his skills up in the air in probability. It wasn't like there was no chance, he just wasn't willing to bet on any of them was all. Well, I'll just keep doing what I'm doing. He sighed. That's enough reflecting anyway. Back to reading while I can. With everything on soul magic finished, that left him with two choices for what to do next, either the deeply researched signature spells that some mages had spent their lives on, or else move to the information on other Tier 3 skills that had existed throughout history. He knew what would be more valuable to him, but gave in to what he was most curious about in the end. His prior train of thought couldn't help but put him in the mood to see what others had achieved, and he pulled out the books to see exactly that. Reading the entire shelf in minutes and feeling it capture his imagination. In the thousands of years the world had stood, less than 100 individuals had reached the third tier of a skill, at least as long as the soul mages weren't counted in the tally. At first Ben thought something must have been missing. Surely that number was a little too low, but the more he thought about it, the more sense it made. It wasn't considered a monumental wall for nothing, and the lifespan extension that achieving it would provide was great. There were easily races on the world who would live close to, if not more than, 1,000 years if they reached the third tier at a young enough age. Even with the soul mages doing their best to help others break through, that didn't mean their efforts would bear fruit either. It was easy to imagine decades being spent to raise someone up, only for them to never cross that finish line. Which really just goes to show how hard it is. Is Falk going to manage it? Our design was as good as it could be, it's just past the threshold of what should be possible for him, but will that be enough? Among the books was a couple on the soulsmith, the one with the very same skill his teacher was striving for, but it granted no clues on that front. It offered plenty of valuable information on just what the skill could manage, along with the skills and jobs that went into getting to that point and had gone on to become available after, but it left out what he personally considered the exceptionally important bit that was the act that pushed it past its limits. Stop worrying about it. If it doesn't work, then we'll think of something else. Or I'll just try and convince Sonia to corner him and see if he'll cave under pressure. He could worry about it if it failed. For the time being, he was going to focus on his own growth, taking in the records of all of the skills that had made it to their pinnacle, magics and combat ones, along with far stranger options, before finishing up that floor in its entirety, taking it in and moving on to the fourth with the time he had left. Is this going to be okay? Thera asked, the confidence she was feeling for the quest waning now that the day had properly come and she was seeing just who she was supposed to be looking after. We're protecting him, right? Not delivering him for an execution. It was easy to see why anyone might think such a thing given how Verbum was acting. Laying on the ground, he clung to Killy's leg, seeming more like he was pleading for his life than off on an adventure. Please, please, please don't make me do this, he begged, tears in his eyes. Let them check it out on their own. If they're rank 1, then they don't need me. We need answers fast, so they actually do, Killy told him calmly, putting up with the outburst far better than any of them hoped. And you'll be perfectly safe with them both. I've looked into the matter personally. Sure. Unless they're the ones who turn on me. The two of them are monsters, Killy. You'd agree if you could see their status. I've already seen the entirety of Ben's and the relevant sections of Thera's. You aren't getting out of this. No. No, I won't go. You can't make me. Are you really sure about that? She sighed, wishing she didn't have to put up with this sort of thing when she was so close to a break. I am. I'm standing firm. I'm not going. I see. The calmness of her expression was betrayed by her clenching fists, clearly done with his outburst as she turned to focus on Thera. If you'd be so kind, could you place him under a sleep spell for now? What? She was basically being asked to commit a crime, placing a spell with any sort of mind effect on a civilian without the authority to do such a thing, but Killy just waved the concern away. I'm asking on my authority as the knowledge holder. I'm in charge of his education and he won't grow if he doesn't go out. Really? Place any spell you need to on him during the outing and I'll approve it. Hearing how calmly she said that just made him scream all of the more, but everyone ignored him as Thera gave in. She had clear misgivings about the fact, but the level of power and authority that anyone who'd achieved the third tier wielded wasn't to be argued with. If she said to do it, then nobody would stop her. The dark mana flew from Thera's staff, its density having an instantaneous effect. Verbum's eyes snapped shut while his teacher carelessly hoisted him up and threw him into the back of their cart, leaving them ready to set off. If he gives you too much trouble, don't hesitate to do it again, she called out, considering the potential benefits of keeping a dark mage on staff for all of his future lessons as the three of them drove off, making their way through one of the wild gates before Thera raised them up into the air, leisurely heading off to their first destination. While they were tasked with helping Verbum get to the 4 locations that needed a deeper level of searching than a typical party could provide, they weren't exactly pressed for time, making her drive just a little slower for the unsecured passenger in the back and letting Ben handle the trip far better than he usually would as he took the chance to chat with her, treating their unconscious companion like he wasn't even there. Excited. Obviously. This is our first official rank 1 quest. How could I not be? When they'd gained the rank, both had been expecting far more to come in for them than really had. But in the year since they'd reached the pinnacle of the career, there'd been no calls for either of them, much to Ben's satisfaction and Thera's dismay. She would still do any of the harder jobs that came up around Stonewall, but it hadn't come close to scratching the itch of something big. Protecting someone at the third tier, though? That would absolutely do it. Ha! Hopefully it will be quick and easy, and then we can finally head home. What, you don't want to stay longer to read more? Maybe if it was for something different, but as things stand since I've read through the top 3 floors, I don't really want to spend weeks reading through the first 2. Maybe next time we're by the gate I'll pop through for a few hours of reading, but right now all I want is to get back to my forge. I've got ideas to test and homunculi to abuse. He had plenty he wanted to try making, being thoroughly inspired by everything he'd consumed while he'd been there, and the homunculi were tools to help train his crafting as much as they had been to help with his reading. He fully believed they would help him reach greater heights by removing the limit that was his singular body. I missed them already. He sighed to himself, all of them locked in their crates and waiting for his return. But I am so not risking damaging them by taking them into the woods to encounter who knows what. Hey, it didn't seem like I'll be able to get more from Vividus, so unless Thera gets a little better at it, I need to take care of them so they don't get damaged. Just you watch, they're going to be my path to raising my crafting to a completely different realm. He barely noticed the vaguely dissatisfied sounds his god made in his head over the sudden scream as Verbum woke up and in one smooth movement tried to escape, not noticing their location as they flew amongst the clouds when he was trying to toss himself over the cart's edge. Luckily for him, Ben was quick to react, his fastest minds moving his body, making him lunge to the back of the cart and grab Verbum as he was just starting to notice his mistake, pulling him back to safety to keep them from failing the quest so soon after it started. "No killing yourself, please," Ben told him, seeing the clear panic in Verbum's expression after almost meeting his end. "I'm pretty sure I'd end up in a lot of trouble if things went wrong." "Why are we flying?" "Because it's faster to avoid the treetops." "Now relax a bit, would you?" "How am I supposed to relax?" "How are you so relaxed? One false move and we're plummeting to our deaths." "Does this thing even have seatbelts?" "Yes, actually." "He was super insistent on putting some in," Thera called back as she drove, not paying much mind to what was going on behind her as soon as it was clear their passenger wasn't about to meet his grisly end. "And she's driving a lot slower than usual, so this isn't even that bad," Ben added. "Not that bad? We're flying in a cart. Rotten Earth? I hate it here." It looked like he wanted to run away, the only thing stopping him being how trapped he was in the sky, and Ben briefly considered if it would be worthwhile to ask Thera to put him to sleep again until they landed, but ultimately thought better of it. He did have an agreement with Killy after all and fully intended on cashing it in. "Well, if you need a distraction so badly, then I can think of something," Ben told him as he moved to sit beside him, helping Verbum buckle up as he did. "In exchange for doing this and keeping you alive, I do need you looking at my status after all, so what do you say we get to it? If I tell you now, then what motivation do you have to actually look after me afterwards?" "The motivation would be not being the guy who let a third-tier skill holder die while acting as his guard." "Seriously, man. I get you've got your issues, but it's in my own best interest that you be okay by the end of this little outing, so try and relax a little." Ben felt himself being appraised with eyes full of suspicion, but it seemed that Verbum decided to give in. Even if he had zero intention of giving any faith in the matter, Ben was right. He was trapped up there and needed the distraction. "Fine. What am I looking at?" "Everything." He wasted no time connecting to him, wanting to see everything the other could as Verbum began using his skill, making Ben's full status visible to him in a way it would normally never be before looking deeper as a flood of information sprung forth for his first title, Apostle of Myriad. Ben read all that was available to see in his view before Verbum began to mentally scroll, revealing more and more information for Ben as he took in all he could. The information was presented without rhyme or reason, no order to any of it. It instead seemed to show every single thing the system had about apostle titles, leaving him to understand why the other had trouble with the skill as he was shown how it related to skills and jobs he'd never held and likely never would. He let Verbum know that he could scroll through it significantly faster, but it made little difference. There was simply too much. After 10 whole minutes of it, he hadn't seen a single thing that was actually relevant to him, even when that was comparable to reading multiple books on that one small topic, and he knew that something needed to change. Any way to narrow this down a bit?" It's not the easiest thing, but yeah. How do you want it shrunk? General information about the title, job, or skill, along with how it relates to anything else in my status. I don't need anything that's not related to anything I already have. At least not right now. There were some things he might want to expand further on later, but for the time being that would be enough, and he felt Verbum do as he'd asked as the information above shrank to a far more manageable level, at least for him. There was still a lot that was irrelevant to his interests, but plenty hit on the things he actually wanted to know as he got reading, going from title to title, job to job, and skill to skill. A lot of it was exactly as he'd expected, with things like Apostle of Myriad giving him bonuses to his Connect and the Forgotten One giving a growth bonus to the Stealth, even if it didn't get much use, along with plenty of his jobs and titles granting bonuses to his Sacrilege. But there was a few interesting ones as well. Enemy of Aneth gave some minor bonuses to both combat and magic, something he'd never have expected but was happy to take, especially considering that Unending Crafting had taken in both Knife and Hammer Wielder when they awakened, and the Mad Apostle gave Connect bonuses as well. Many of his jobs would provide a small bit of growth to skills other than the category the notifications would give as well, with the effects not being worth mentioning when they'd be taken, yet building up more and more with all of the ones he'd gained, which was plenty nice to know in its own way, adding even more motivation to get through them as quick as he could for all of the benefits it would entail. But even that wasn't the standout of what he was seeing. 2 of his titles managed to blow everything else out of the water. Miracle Maker being the first. When he'd gained it, his god had told him that the few people who had gained it in the past had gone on to do incredible things, but that didn't reveal much about the title's effects. Knowing what he did now, it became a lot more obvious. The title was basically a minor blessing, giving him a small amount of growth in all areas. It wasn't even as good as the Adventurer's job, which did the same thing, but considering that it was something he'd gained freely, it was an absolute boon, though even that paled in comparison to the second one. Awakener. His newest title, the one he'd gained for helping to forcefully awaken so many mages to the second tier, had instantly become one of the best things on his status. It reduced the difficulty he would have awakening someone to a second tier of a skill, but that meant nothing to him compared to its other effect. It reduced the difficulty of him getting any of his own skills to awaken. It made it very clear it was only to the second tier for him as well, crushing his dreams of finally getting King of Sacrilege over the edge. But that didn't matter. That was another tool in his arsenal that he was damn sure he was going to be putting to use again in the future. At least as soon as I can. I have 2 skills at the 8th level right now, so nothing I can immediately start testing, but I have other skills I want to push over the edge one day if I can. Defense Enhancement, you might be level 6 now, but just wait. One day I'll have you awakened, and then I won't need to worry about just how mortal I feel on this planet anymore. He let himself indulge his small fantasy of being injured less as he read through more and more, all the while continuing to their first destination. Between Skill Learner letting me learn uncommon skills easier and Awakener helping me get to the next tier, all I really need is a title that would help me level my skills easier. Know anything that would fit Myriad? MMH, I guess. What? His god didn't answer, leaving him alone with those parting words as Thera began to bring them down to the ground below to begin their investigation with Verbum. "Oh, sweet land!" the Pleiadian yelled out as he jumped out of the cart, looking deeply relieved to be on the ground again, even if it meant needing to start his investigation as Thera spoke up. "So we should be in the right area. I think we just need to go north a bit until we're in the general vicinity we need to be." Those words were enough to pull the joy from Verbum in an instant, leaving him looking like he wanted to make a quick escape and only stopping thanks to how far from civilization they all were. Ben, for his part, didn't want to wait for him to get comfortable. His god's lax attitude meant it couldn't have been anything bad, but Myriad's parting words did leave him wanting to see just what it could be about, so he walked over to him in the middle of his indecision and threw him over his shoulder, leaving Thera to hold back her laughter. "I'm so used to seeing you as the one in that position. Decided to try dishing it out yourself for once." Just didn't want to wait," he said, ignoring the feeling of Verbum's struggles against his grip. "Come on, let's check this out." "Verbum, what should we be looking for? Killy didn't tell you? She mentioned that you needed to be in charge of handling things while we were working everything out. Didn't she tell you that?" "I thought she was lying." "Okay. Well, she wasn't, so focus." Ben felt the man wiggle around, trying to get out of his grasp but ultimately failing in his escape and giving up, finally answering the question. Strange plant growth and animal behavior, he eventually gave in. It was enough to freak out a completely different rank 1 adventurer, but they still want me looking into it of all things. I'm supposed to be important. Toss it to someone who doesn't matter. Damn it. Yeah. Life's hard on all of us, Ben muttered, not really caring about the whining as he looked around. He'd been to plenty of areas within the Untamed Lands before for one task or another, but for whatever reason, the section he currently found himself going through felt familiar. He couldn't put his finger on exactly why, but then, it was a living forest. If he'd been in the area before, there was plenty of time for it to grow and change a bit, leaving it just foreign enough that he couldn't place it as they walked. When he looked at Thera, it was obvious she was feeling the same thing. A sense of familiarity that was leaving her to look around just a little more than usual before stopping in her tracks, her eyes going wide as she did. "Oh, this is going to be weird to explain," she muttered, just as Ben caught sight of what she'd noticed and finally let things click into place. In the distance was a tree, one of many in fact that was experiencing some unusual growth, just as Verbum had said. Its branches were all warped, twisted into right angles to make hundreds of cubes within the one plant. Seeing it left him stunned enough that it gave Verbum a chance to escape his arms as he looked at what the other two were staring at. The discomfort of being there obvious enough on him if only anyone were to look his way. "That's it," he muttered, trying to be quiet. "That's what was in the report. An entire section of forest changed without rhyme or reason. Anyway, since we can see it from here, why don't we stay nice and safe and as far away as we can while I get to work dash." He was cut off as Ben took his hand, dragging him in further. Both he and Thera needed to see what it was like despite the protests of the one they were meant to be guarding. "Ben?" Thera began, not having any clue what she was supposed to say about everything they were seeing, but knowing she couldn't leave it without comment. "I literally could have never predicted this was going to happen." He tried to argue in his defense while she just shook her head. "I mean, I believe you, but maybe we should have come back for the nails before it got to this point. It was free faith. How could I do that to Myriad when this was so harmless? Hell, I'm pretty sure despite how this looks it's still harmless. Though I can't deny it looks a little bad." When they got closer it was clear it wasn't 1 or 2 trees with the strangely cubed branches, but a forest of them, with even more effects to go with it. No matter the species of the plant, their leaves had developed into an irregular shape too. Far more straight lines than many of them would normally allow as they took the shapes of squares, filling the branches above them and littering the ground below, but it got worse from there. He was seeing square nests and hives in the areas of each plant that had caused the change, and the bugs around were flying in geometric patterns, leaving him to see the long-term consequences of what he'd done to win a bet over a year in the past. He was seeing how the forest had changed from him, turning each tree into faith generators, an enchantment nailed into them to gather it for his cubic god. "What are you both talking about?" Verbum asked, looking at the two with even more suspicion but being ignored as Ben walked around. He only found one tree nearby that didn't have anything to block where he'd hammered in his enchanted nails, but it revealed that even if he wanted to get rid of it, it was too late without tearing down the entire forest. A dense layer of bark had grown over it, burying it in the plant's depths to keep any chance of removing it as nothing but a dream. He turned around, wondering just how he was supposed to explain this, only to find Verbum looking on the edge of a panic attack, knowing the two of them knew something about what they were seeing, but with neither of them outright saying it. It was flaring his most paranoid of delusions, making Ben slowly raise his hands to try and calm him down. Verbum, I need you to chill. Okay? So, this is kind of a funny story when you really stop to think about it, but I actually know why the forest looks like this, so that actually makes things super easy for us," he told him, trying to seem positive and failing to elicit the same response in the other. "Okay, so you're definitely going to laugh. But this all started with a bet from a goddess." Verbum did not laugh once during the explanation. If anything, it only made him look more horrified, all the more so after he consulted his skill and found he was being told the truth. But it did put a quick end to the first of the investigation sites, leaving them to trudge back to the cart and move on to the next one in an awkward silence. Interesting to learn at least though. Constantly bombarding plants with that sort of mental enchantment can have that sort of effect. I wonder what would happen if I do the same thing on the possessed tree I have back home. Of course, the god inside of it is probably doing something similar, so that's worth considering too, even if I haven't seen anything that could be considered dangerous from it. Still, it was a little embarrassing to be the one responsible for a change that had made people concerned enough that an official investigation needed to be done on it, no matter how accidental it may have been. And it sure would have been nice to get some sort of heads up about it. He thought accusingly to the heavens, only for them to remain silent. His god was clearly going to take no blame if he was listening at all, and Ben didn't have it in him to try and get his attention, instead dealing with the uncomfortable silence as they flew back to the gate to get to their next destination to another region. It was only once they got back to the gate network and began making their way to another part of the world that Ben cleared his throat and spoke up. So Verbum, what's the word on the next destination? Anything to be worried about? There's nothing to not be worried about, he said glumly. Whatever feelings he had about the last revelation being replaced by the thoughts of what was ahead. I can't believe Killy put this as the second destination. Why's she gotta do this to me? I've died once already. Why does she want me dead again so freaking soon? Verbum, you're not the only person on this cart that's died before, so let's focus on the main task, and me and Thera will try to make sure it doesn't happen again. What are we getting into? Humph. From the looks of it, a mass sacrifice, or at least that's what I got from the preliminary report. He groaned, getting shocked looks from both Ben and Thera as he said it. But we don't know why, which is why I'm being put out on the chopping block to look into it. The original investigators said there was so much blood it dyed the earth red, and here I go to see it with my own 2 eyes. Okay, even if this is to help the guy grow, that really sounds like something Killy should have mentioned to us ahead of time. Ben muttered as Thera focused on the practical concerns of what they were getting into. Were there any reports of there still being people there? She asked him. And how long ago did this happen? MMH, well, when it was first found and when they originally sent some adventurers to investigate it, there was nobody around as far as they could see, he admitted. But just because that was true then doesn't mean that's true now. You're both prepared to put your lives on the line for me, right? That's what Killy hired you to do. Nope, not even a little. Of course, he lied, all the while thinking about what a pain being an adventurer really was to him. So relax a bit and get to the second part Thera asked about. How long ago are we looking at? A few months at least. But that doesn't mean anything, so both of you stay on your toes for me. All right, no need to yell everything, we're not gonna let you die. Changing topics a bit. How did you die the first time around? That's what you changed topics to? Might as well, he said with a shrug. Come on, we've got a bunch of hours together still, so we might as well chat. I'll start. It was in a cave-in while I was on vacation. I was luckily asleep for what I'm sure was probably the painful bit, but the hours trapping in it beforehand sucked. Your turn. Verbum was quiet for a while, leaving Ben to wonder if he was even going to get an answer until the other spoke up. Building collapsed while I was in it. I was awake, but it was quick enough that I don't really remember it, thankfully. Huh. I was expecting something a bit crazier from you, if I'm honest. You don't get to say that when you died in a cave-in. Ha, fair, it just feels like there should be a few exciting deaths in the different summon groups, you know? Of course, I haven't actually asked Yuzu or the Grey about theirs, so I might have to do that next time I get the chance. Well, I heard one of the aquatic groups had something a bit more interesting at least. Verbum admitted, letting himself get drawn into the topic despite himself since it served as a good distraction. They died during I guess you would call it an alien invasion, but from what I understand the rules of their universe managed to be radically different enough that there weren't things like stars or planets. Either way, a world with enough proper tech that it would make my home planet look comparable to this one against an even more advanced alien race, and this world's idiot gods decided to bring 10 of both the invaded and invaders. Okay, wild. Any idea about other groups then? There's gotta be a bit more craziness to enjoy from the rest. Don't know. I only heard about that one in the context of them being compared to my own group's situation. Makes sense, I'm sure both cases were awkward as hell and could have used a bit more planning. Seriously, what were the gods thinking with some of the ones they pulled? Of course, I should probably be thankful for however rushed they ended up. If they were able to do a proper look at our souls, I doubt they would have picked someone with affinities like mine. He was going to ask more, wanting to learn about the foreign world of the other summoned now that they were talking, but needed to put it to an end all too soon as Thera brought the cart to the ground with their destination nearby. I think we're close, she told them, sounding strangely unsure as she spoke. It should just be west of here. He could see there was something on her mind, the area picking at her the way the last one had at him, even if he couldn't see it himself. He wasn't getting any sense of familiarity from it, but seeing her on edge was enough to bring up his guard while Verbum had to be dragged forward. Everything okay? Ben asked her, getting a hesitant nod in return. Yeah, fine. I think what he said before must have gotten into my head is all. Well, worst to worst, we book it out of here and apologize to Killy about our lackluster investigation. Or we book it out of here now? Verbum added, full of hope that they both ignored, both of them focusing on each other. Sounds like a plan. Just don't go getting sacrificed or anything. Okay? Ha! Wouldn't that just be how I meet my end, though? Here we are on a planet being conquered and I get done in by some crazy cultist instead. I'd be an embarrassment to every other human on the planet. Can you two please stop ignoring me? Verbum yelled, finally getting Ben's attention as they kept going on their way. Okay, but if there is anything to worry about out here, yelling is a pretty sure way to get some attention, so maybe reconsider that? Stroking his fears felt a little mean, but it instantly had Verbum clamping his free hand over his mouth, even if it brought more panic to his eyes. All right, man. Between you and me, were you like this before you got to this world, or did this develop entirely from finding out about the Orions? Ben sighed. I'll have you know I'm reacting extremely appropriately considering how my life's gone up till now, he whispered. It's the rest of you that are way too lax about things. Anyway, it looks like we're close. The Pleiadian nodded into the distance where through the trees something could be seen. A wall out in the middle of nowhere, instantly putting Ben on edge as he sped up more of his mines. You didn't say anything about a building out here, he whispered back. No building, it's just the one wall. It's part of what we were sent out to investigate, but I'm just saying we could leave. It would be harmless. Who would have to know? We aren't leaving without checking it out. Maybe we should though, came a comment from the last person he was expecting as Thera spoke up, siding with Verbum as the others silently cheered. The fact that she would even consider quitting early was enough to shock him, but as he focused on her face it changed to pure curiosity. She was blushing, golden in her embarrassment, which made him only want to know more. So she knows something and just isn't telling me. Huh? Yeah, I'm not letting this drop. Guys, we were specifically requested to do this, so we actually need to go check it out. Come on, we'll run at the first sign of danger. Without waiting for any argument, he was already walking ahead, dragging Verbum behind him as the other man struggled while Thera was at his side, seeming fiddly enough that he was sure he was right up until they got there. Verbum's initial description had been woefully inadequate. The ground was still dyed with the untold amount of blood that had been spilt months ago, but along with the giant wall it was all sitting in front of that reached the peaks of some of the trees. There were also the bones. Hundreds of thousands, maybe even millions of them, all coming from thousands upon thousands of animals. It was enough to stop him in his tracks as he mentally apologized to Thera for thinking she had known anything about it. All he could do was stare as he spoke up. Verbum, what is this? Something we should absolutely leave before whoever did all of this comes back. Well, hurry up and use your skill and then we'll get out of this as fast as possible. Make it quick, 'cause I'm suddenly feeling very much on your guy's side here. Fine, damn it. If you won't let me leave, let's get this over with. Ben, Thera started, taking his hand and being cut off by Verbum. Let's see what sort of crazy cult or evil god is responsible for all of this. So here's the thing, she went on, hardly able to get a word in through Verbum as he rambled. There's way too much information from looking at the ground or bones. Okay, then let's focus on the wall and try to narrow down what I see from there. You see, we hadn't really spoken about what I'd been doing at the time, but I was having a really hard time emotionally, and dash. Got it. The wall was made by Thera Oris. Both Ben and Verbum's eyes immediately locked on her, seeing her face twinkle in the light as she looked at the ground, not able to meet either gaze as she tried to figure out how to explain everything she'd done out there, only for their charge to faint under the weight of his sudden fears. Neither of them paid much mind to Verbum on the ground, and as concerning as whatever had happened out there was, it at least eased Ben's worries. Not knowing what had caused such an intense level of death and destruction had been worrying, but finding out it was just something his girlfriend did made the entire area a lot more easy to deal with. "So, should I be calling you my lovely evil goddess now?" he teased. "I'll convert away from Myriad in a heartbeat for you. Don't worry about that." "Ben, this is embarrassing enough." "Ha! I'm sorry. So will you tell me what all of this is then, so we can give this guy some peace of mind whenever he wakes up?" He hoisted Verbum to his back as he said it, carrying the other man and gesturing for them to go back to the cart, letting Thera take a couple minutes to get her thoughts together. "Look, I was just having a really bad time and needed to distract myself a while ago." She tried to explain but largely failed. Her embarrassment over the whole situation combined with Ben, seeing what she'd done making it harder to think straight. "I think Verbum is going to need a bit more than that by the time he comes to," he told her, leaning over to give her a light peck on the cheek. "But take your time to get your thoughts in order. No rush. Do you not, feel weird? Not going to lie, it freaked me out when we got there. But knowing it was you means it's fine, so don't worry about what I think. As a treat, I won't even tease you about it if you're really that uncomfortable." He gave her a gentle smile and patted her head, just enough reassurance for her to calm down. "Look, it's not like I did anything bad," she began. "It's just, while you were stuck in the Dead Gods trial, I was having a bit of a rough time handling things emotionally, so I threw myself into training my magics, and I didn't really think about how it looked, but in hindsight it obviously looks pretty bad, doesn't it? But that was really all it was, and I would really appreciate it if we didn't focus on it because, like I said, it was a pretty emotional time." The golden glow of her face wasn't fading, even as she explained herself and saw no judgment from Ben. Looking back on things, she couldn't deny that she'd gone overboard in her grief. It was easy enough to ignore at the time. She'd needed to lose herself in something just to handle the fact that everyone thought Ben was going to die, and immediately after she'd been too busy with other things. Even if they were at different scales, entering a relationship and witnessing the invasion points being marked didn't give her much leeway to reflect on the past. Being confronted with it again so suddenly changed things in a big way as she was forced to remember everything she'd done. Ben took her hand, placing the unconscious Verbum into a precarious situation as he moved to reassure her. "I'm sorry. I'll do my best to ensure I'm never kidnapped again, though, so there's not going to be anything to stress you out in the future." At least it was meant to be reassuring when he said it, but what it did instead was leave her laughing. "You really are the last person on the planet that should be promising these things," she told him, finally looking a bit more comfortable. "You're tempting fate. There's no such thing as fate in this universe. Myriad keeps promising me as much. Then you brought some of it with you from your old one. That's not possible, is it? No way, there was no fate back in my old reality either, right?" It was something he made a mental note to question Quillith on the next time he spoke with the Grey as they made it back to the cart and buckled Verbum in before moving to go to their next destination. The sudden scream from behind them told the two that Verbum had finally woken up, and the forethought to properly secure him this time kept him from nearly throwing himself from the cart again, even if they were left with a different problem. Clearly on the edge of a panic attack, Verbum was regarding Thera with naked fear as he tried to move himself as far from her as possible in that small cart hanging in the sky. "Verbum, chill. How the hell do you expect me to chill after that?" he screamed, leaving Thera embarrassed all over again. "I'm trapped with someone who left an entire region of forest uninhabited. Wow, was it really to that extent? Well, what's done is done. Listen, man, I get it looks bad, but I know you've already looked at Thera's soul. You know how much mana she has. That's just a side effect of her training her magic to the best of her abilities. She did it out in the middle of nowhere specifically to keep anyone else from getting involved, and if either of us realized that that's what we were investigating, then we would have told you. It was a simple mistake is all, no need to make mountains out of molehills." When Verbum didn't respond, Ben connected to him, wanting to see what he was thinking and finding him using his skill to the best of his abilities to try and verify what he'd just been told. It was obvious he didn't trust a thing, but he was on the edge of panic, and it was all he could do to distract himself, so Ben left him to it, knowing he would come to the answer he was given eventually on his own. Well, while you're deciding if you want to try and make a run for it, do me a favor and tell us what we should be looking out for in the next place. Ben called back. What are we keeping an eye out for this time? A village, he said eventually, not giving away too much attention as he rushed to figure out if they were telling the truth or if he should jump from the sky and run, hoping that his high attributes would be enough to survive the landing. It's only a rumor, so we don't even have a set location, but some people are saying that there's a community deep in the Untamed Lands, so people want answers on if it's a group that's moved out there for some reason or if it's something worse. Also, this is absolutely a you guys problem. I'll just confirm whether they're telling the truth or not. He was so focused on the skill going through his mind that Verbum didn't notice the change his explanation brought to Ben and Thera, both of them silently looking at each other with neither knowing who would speak first. You don't think? Thera whispered hesitantly, not wanting to believe she was right in what she was thinking. Or course not. Ben was quick to shut down, equally as quiet to keep Verbum from panicking again. There's no way. It would be ridiculous after how these first two have turned out. Well, things are already ridiculous because of that. Who's to say it can't get worse? Me. I'm telling you, we are not about to end up in the Demidemon village. Ben, Thera. So good to see you both again. Toltho cheered as the villagers gathered around them. And you've brought a friend, who doesn't seem to be looking too good, I might add. Is this perhaps not a friendly visit? Saying Verbum didn't look too good was an understatement. He was freaked out enough the moment they were swarmed by the villagers. It only took Ben and Thera being called out by name to push him over the edge, making him pass out yet again. Ahem. Good seeing you two tell though, Ben said, trying to be light and friendly, even as he kept the unconscious Verbum from falling on his face. And it's really more of an accident that we ended up here. It's complicated. And your friend. Also complicated. Since we're here, why don't we do a little tour of the village and I'll give you a rundown. Sounds good. I'd love for you to see what we've built up since you'd last been here. The leader of that splinter group of Myriad's believers was in good cheer, not feeling the need to probe too deeply given the man before him was a servant of the god he'd converted to and had done so much for them, and he wanted to show that they'd been putting what they'd been taught to work, even if they still had room to grow. It was a chance to let them see how their lives had changed for the better and let their gratitude for the lives they now got to live be known. In that case, I'll find you in a bit, Thera told him as she was being led away by some of the younger students she'd taught while they'd been there last. Looks like I'm seeing how well they've been practicing their instruments. Sounds good, have fun. With that they parted, with Thera being swarmed by most of the free demidemons while the rest got back to whatever work they had, leaving Ben with Toltho to walk around and tell the tale of how their impromptu visit had come to be. So we're helping this guy with some of his work, and part of it was investigating rumors of a mysterious village, Ben said at the end to sum it up. It just so happened that the mystery ended up being you guys. And he's asleep during his work because he's an absolute scaredy cat who's having some trouble coming face to face with the unknown. Ben sighed, getting tired of how much he was having to carry Verbum. Though I'll admit this might be a little bit my fault. Seriously, how the hell have I been involved with 3 of these investigations already? He expected some sass from his god but got nothing and was left assuming Myriad must have been busy as they continued the tour, seeing the changes that had come in his time away from them all. The demidemons had been busy since he'd last been there, that much was obvious. Beyond how much more housing had been established as well as the growth of their fields, all of which were full of the crops that Sakhel had helped guide them on planting after he dumped the task on her. He was seeing a lot more of one thing in particular. Bodies. Specifically those of demons with their skins out to be preserved and their meat being cooked and stored as those they shared heritage with made sure to put everything to use, even if the volume spoke loudly of just how many of those otherworldly beasts they were seeing. You haven't lost anyone to them yet, have you? Ben asked, nodding to the pile that was in the middle of being processed. No, they aren't coming too close to the village either, at least not yet. This is just what the hunting parties are coming back with each day. As bad as it may be, they're keeping us fed. Bad? Yeah, that's probably an understatement. It's been almost 2 months since the gate closed and they're already seeing them all the way out here? There's no way any have already been born on this world, right? I mean, I know they breed fast, but I don't know how fast, and this seems like a lot. There has to be a place with an invasion point reasonably close by. It would make the most sense. Still, how many are you finding a day? It's not so much a daily occurrence, but for the last month, we've come across herds of around 20 each nearly once each week. It's nothing we can't deal with. For now, unless things get worse. Okay, maybe it's a good thing I came out here. He knew the demi-demons and in plenty of ways couldn't help but feel responsible for them. He was the one who took them in for Myriad, and he'd played a large part in making them aware of the wider world. And I may have traumatized a few of them by killing their old gods. Either way, I can't just do nothing. His decision made, he focused on the man beside him as he worked out everything he'd need to do with the time he had. Alright, in case things get worse, I can't leave you guys like this, so for now let's find Thera again, and after that we'll see just how equipped I can get you all in only a few hours. Actually, Toltho, do me a favor and grab me both the Smith and Enchanter teams I put together last time I was here. They might as well get a decent lesson out of this. Verbum was left tucked away in a corner as Ben focused on what he needed to do with the hours he had, taking advantage of Thera's mana to do it. He had her make large volumes of iron for him to work since that was the only one she was comfortable materializing, while he took from her what he needed to make everything else, ending with a source soul and a mountain of raw materials to use to make his vision a reality. The main 3 things he created were a hammer, tongs, and forge, leaving the 2 teams he'd gathered to watch him work and observe as he showed just what made him an awakened craftsman when he began heating vast quantities of metal to put to use before he took his hammer to it all to shape it. There was a lot he needed to make with the time he had, armors to fit everyone, wanting something for even the children in case anything came to it, along with shields and spears, the 2 weapons that the majority of them had been becoming acquainted with since he'd left the village. With his hands moving in a blur, metal being shaped with his skill and mana, all to match people he'd only eyeballed before but still ending perfectly sized. He was a master of his craft. Even his quick works were leagues above what an average artisan could produce, and it showed with every blow of his hammer and final product, where he moved on to the next of what he needed to be done. Enchanting. He hadn't packed many rings, only having the 10 affinity and 1 barrier he always wore on his fingers. But that didn't matter. He had all of them in their awakened forms and didn't hesitate to put them to their full potential, along with taking from everything that existed within his personal status. His skills were high and his resistances outrageous. It was easy enough to use what little there was at his disposal to make a masterpiece, or even hundreds of them as things were handed out to the villagers around to make sure they all fit properly. Little was needed to adjust by the end, and even if none of them could tell immediately, it wasn't hard for him to see how excellent it all had been. Before enchantments had gone down, everything was ranked as upper rare in his eyes, and after that busy round of enchanting it was all lower ultra rare. Not the best he could do, but considering that in the span of a few hours he'd made a few hundred items that reached such a quality, it was an excellent result. That one small village was outfitted better than any army, with their protection as secured as could be with the time he had to work with. But no levels, huh? With so much stuff made at those ranks, I was honestly hoping for something from my enchanting or crafting, but oh well. I know it's a high boundary, I'll break it eventually. He'd just keep making all he could and learning from each experience, but for the time being he'd done all he could. It was time to wake Verbum, whether he liked it or not, to move on to their final destination to bring the quest to a close. The flight to the final destination was quiet and uncomfortable, with Verbum tucked away in the back as far from the both of them as it was possible for him to get, eyeing the 2 with suspicion and concern the entire time until Ben forced himself to break the silence. So Verbum, I get you weren't awake for most of that, but good news. It was also an easy one. The gods are fully aware of who they are and the fact they're out there, so it's nothing to worry about. They're called demi-demons, he shot back coldly. How is that nothing to worry about? I guess it was a bit too much to hope that he'd knocked himself out before he could see their status. Shame. It's nothing to worry about because they're harmless and more or less just victims of the forbidden gods. Since those guys are dead, nothing to worry about, so why don't we just not stress and focus on the last leg of this? Why? So I can find out you two psychos have your fingers all over it too? How the hell are two people involved in so much shit? Was meeting me and becoming my guards part of some sort of plan as well? Just what the hell are you going to do to me when all of this is over? Huh? Silence me so I can't tell anyone what sort of maniacs you are. Well, seeing as how we haven't actually done anything wrong in any of those 3 areas, what would you even tell? I would. Verbum retreated into his skill, trying to find anything incriminating in the ocean of knowledge it left him swimming in, only to come up empty. It wasn't like there wasn't anything ethically dubious in either of their pasts. It was just neither played enough of a part in those 3 small investigations for him to come up with anything. At worst, there was the issue that the cube trees had a mind control aspect to them that had altered them and their environment, but it wasn't bad enough that Ben was worried about it being revealed to the world at large. Verbum, listen. You can be as paranoid as you want later, but for now we should be getting pretty close to the final site, so can you just give us the rundown already? Ben sighed. Then we can all go home and you never have to see either of us again unless I decide to find you for info on any skills, jobs, or titles. Don't come looking for me after this is done. I won't help you. No, you definitely will. Ben told him with enough certainty to make the other shrink back in fear. But focus on the task at hand. What are we looking into with you now? Another large dead zone in the forest. I can't wait to find out how you both did it this time too, he said sarcastically. More training out in the woods? Maybe made some weird item to drive all of the animals away? Hell, what about another secret race on the planet clearing out the land? No, actually all of that is too stupid. Why would we get a repeat of anything? The last 3 have all been different. Why wouldn't I get to see you both involved in something new and horrifying? His rambling continued on in the background as both Ben and Thera looked at each other, both of them unable to keep themselves from questioning if they might have played some part in whatever they were about to walk in on too. It would be ridiculous. But then, I said that for the last stop too, and look at how that turned out. Is there anything I might have done in this region of the woods? Any experiments or something? It's far enough from the gate that I should be in the clear, right? Myriad, can you just tell me if I'm responsible at all? And if I am, we can just rip the band-aid off and tell Verbum before we land? Unfortunately, his god was still silent, likely still busy with any range of tasks from dealing with his other believers or his new priestess to helping the other gods with their war prep. A part of him wanted to go up there himself since he had the time, just to question the cube a bit to get what he could, but decided against it. If he was involved in some way, then he was sure it would be obvious by the time they landed, and he didn't want to take his eyes off Verbum before they were on the ground. With how stressed he seemed, Ben wasn't willing to take bets that the panicked man wouldn't just jump from the cart if the treetops looked thick enough to catch him. I think we're good, Thera muttered to him the moment they were on land. What about you? I don't remember this place at all, so I think it's fine, he said with relief before turning to their charge, who was still in the cart. Hey Verbum, good? Well, technically bad news. Whatever's going on here, we aren't involved this time. Humph. How's that bad news? He grumbled. That sounds like the best news I've gotten all day. It's bad news because if you look at the other 3, it was all harmless and easy to get answers to since we knew what was going on. We don't have the first clue about what's happening here. Could be anything. He said it with cheer, enjoying the sense that he was guiltless in it all, even as his reasoning made Verbum sink further into his fear. Whether the Pleiadian liked it or not, Ben was entirely right. The fact that none of them knew what was happening there meant they were all significantly worse off, and that it only seemed to elate his guards only made it worse. While Ben was happy that the entire report to Killy wouldn't be covered in his name, Thera was more thrilled about what it represented. A proper adventure. There was no mystery or romance to seeing whatever they'd already been involved in the past. But this represented something new. Likely even something exciting from the looks of things. It was subtle at first, but despite the fact that they were told they were investigating a strangely dead region of the woods, it was filled with the small signs of life one would expect if they only looked. The occasional footprints, obvious scratches on trees, even what looked like bite marks on some plants, all pointing to the idea that it was a lived-in land, if not for the silence that filled it. No matter how long they listened, there was nothing to show that they weren't alone. Kind of spooky. The most obvious explanation would be that someone or something had cleared out the woods of animal life, the same way Thera had in her training, but they didn't see any obvious signs of people. Of course, their investigation had just started. They'd get their answers soon enough once Verbum got the time he needed to find the cause of it all. Ben kept close to him no matter how uncomfortable his presence made the other man, while Thera took a walk around the immediate area, looking for any signs of magic that could explain the empty land, along with anything else that could pose a risk, taking her role as a guard just as seriously. They both knew that Verbum's safety was their priority. Neither of them wanted to see him get hurt no matter how he may have been acting. So with the fact set firmly in her thoughts, she pushed herself to examine the area on another level, both with her earth sense and her empathy. Pushing both the best she could. She felt the first stretch out a bit beyond the subtle way it always existed in the back of her thoughts, while the latter struggled to keep up, needing her active attention and to contend with the lower level, even if both felt something the moment she reached out far enough. Movement and malice all coming right at them at high speeds. "Ben!" she yelled out, the warning in her voice just enough to put him on his toes as the earth around them exploded with 5 demons rushing to its surface. All of his minds moved to bring the world to a standstill the moment the demons burst forth from the ground below, letting him take them all in for what they were. They shared matching body plans, looking like giant millipedes, the portions of them stretching above the ground already bigger than he was and hinting at plenty more still down below as they gently swayed while he worked to figure out how he wanted to approach things. He could already tell Thera was preparing a spell from the subtle movement of the earth and was willing to leave it to her, letting him focus on making sure Verbum would be safe, or at least that was his intent. The fact that he could make the world feel like it was moving in slow motion meant he didn't think he had much he really needed to be worried about, but the monsters in front of him showed him how wrong that belief was. All at once, it looked as though what Ben had taken for hundreds of legs had exploded out towards them, separating from their bodies with enough force behind them to make them appear fast even against the frame of reference he was acting within as they targeted the 3 of them with a heavy degree of precision, obviously to act as weapons and leaving him no desire to see what would come from taking those hits. Oh shit, this is going to be tight. With almost no room to think, Ben let loose almost his entire reserve of mana, pouring it into the ground to rip up dirt to be shot out as bullets, each of them set on a collision course with the many projectiles flying through the air, carrying enough force to be sure to knock them off their path, even if he didn't have enough in him to get all of them. As high as his mana had grown to be, it wasn't unlimited and he couldn't be perfect in defending against that volley of attacks. He didn't bother trying to affect the shots he was sure would miss, but there was one other thing he was able to do to make sure that both Thera and Verbum would be safe. He didn't waste any mana on protecting himself. But that's fine because I've got something else for that. Bury your shoes. Do your stuff. I said bury your shoes. Do your stuff. Oh shit.
Oh shit, oh shit, oh shit.
His shoes weren't working. That was the thought that first raced through his head as he tried to activate them. But it was wrong. The enchantments were still in perfect working order, and he still had an external power source in the form of the mana batteries with him. No, he was simply discovering the limits of his enchantment in a way he'd never had to before. This was his first time trying to use that barrier since he'd gained any sort of thought speed skill, and now that he was attempting to put it up with his minds moving at their full potential, he was confronted with the horrible reality of it. While there was no lag to be seen when thinking like a normal person, when a person was seeing the world at over 1,000% faster, it was like they weren't even activating. He watched in horror as the demon's attack came closer, while at the same time his barrier started to slowly rise from his feet, knowing it wouldn't make it as dozens of spikes already rushed past the limits of where his defense would start and leaving him with little in the way of options. He placed his faith in his jacket, wanting to believe that it would handle the blow fine for all of the enchantments he'd placed on it, and directed the rest of his focus to the spikes coming straight at his face. So close now, he could see that what he'd mistaken for legs at a distance were instead some sort of specialized scales, not that it helped things. He couldn't move his body as fast as he could think, so there was no dodging them. Instead, it was a matter of deciding what hits to take. His legs were a write-off. They weren't important enough to try and protect compared to his more relevant bits, so he didn't even consider how many times they were about to be stabbed, instead focusing on the 7 that would be hitting his face and neck. Automatically, He accepted the 2 that would simply skim the sides of his head before ordering the remaining 5 on the level of danger they were to him before he began squeezing the few remaining drops of mana he contained to do everything he could. Destruction was a part of his material manipulation that he put to quick work as he pushed his mana to dull as many spikes as he could, not destroying them entirely, meaning he'd still be taking hits, but enough that they wouldn't dig into his flesh and skull. 4 of them he was able to get to a slightly less dangerous state before he felt himself falling just short of mana exhaustion, leaving the final one that was going to dig into his neck. As a final act, he did his best to cancel the barrier he could see was still slowly going up, wanting Thera to have no problem getting to him to provide whatever aid she could before he canceled the effects of his thought speed on all of his minds. He knew it was going to hurt and saw no reason he should have to experience it in slow motion. The notifications going off in his head coincided with pain everywhere as he was knocked to the ground, unable to keep himself standing because of the damage to his legs, nor able to breathe with the hole in his neck. The rest of his face was battered by the projectiles he'd dulled, and the only part of him left unharmed was his torso, safely covered by his coat which had decided to show its full use. At the same time as he fell, Thera's spell came into effect, enveloping the 5 beasts in a thick shell of stone and crushing down, trapping and killing them before she ran over to his side, her life magic already on her fingertips as she first worked to close the wound on his neck before moving elsewhere, letting him get the air he needed to speak. "Guess who just got piercing resistance?" he shouted cheerfully despite the pain, leaving Thera to shake her head as she worked to close the rest of his wounds. "I've literally never heard of that skill before. How the hell have you been stabbed enough to get something like that?" "I don't know, but I'll take it. The more defensive skills I get, the better off I'll be next time anything like this comes up. This just means next time I'll need something like slash resistance. Or maybe fracture resistance. It would be pretty cool if I could get something that would keep my bones from breaking. Or skin for that matter, would that be laceration resistance? Honestly, the possibilities are endless here. How are you so calm about this?" Verbum screamed, rushing to their side with fear in his eyes, his concerns about the 2 forgotten now that he'd been in the presence of a real threat. "You're bleeding everywhere. How are you joking around?" I guess since you're so important you don't actually see this much, but this sort of thing happens on this world a lot," Ben explained. "This is barely even worth being bothered about by this point so long as I have a lovely healer nearby. You honestly just kind of get used to it after a certain point, you know?" His explanation was obviously only leaving the other in a worse mental state as Verbum envisioned the life he might have been forced to live if not for his 3rd-tier skill, with Thera rushing to try and fix the patently false belief that Ben was forcing into his mind. "This is absolutely in no way a common occurrence for normal people," she said firmly. "Ben just has the worst luck in the universe is all. My planet isn't some nightmare world where everyone is constantly on the verge of death." It was a statement Ben wasn't going to let off without a fight though. "We're literally in the middle of an invasion against a race that's never lost with the fate of the planet at stake. I'm talking about besides that, the majority of adventurers don't get hurt enough to get some of the defense skills you have, let alone an average person. Don't go trying to scare him. Hey, I'm just calling it as I see it from one summon to another. I think you're just too used to seeing the world as it is and accepting it as normal. Gotta trust me here, Thera. This planet is significantly more dangerous than my last." She could see in his eyes he fully believed what he was saying and wasn't going to back down on it, so she just shook her head and finished healing him, letting Verbum deal with a growing sense of fear as a side effect while he took what Ben had to say to heart. It wasn't long until Ben could sit up, his physical state well enough to get back to the matter at hand as he and the other 2 started making their way over to the fallen demons. "So investigation over?" he asked. "These 5 have been clearing out the land. Either eating or hunting seems like the most likely option here." "I'm perfectly happy to call it that, so let's just go already," Verbum begged, getting ignored again as Thera shook her head. "If there's 5 then there might be more. We need to keep on our toes for at least a bit. Come on." They dragged Verbum to the corpses, expecting his skill to work better now that he had something more relevant to focus on, but got one final surprise at the end. "One of these is still alive," Ben said, holding up a hand to stop Thera from finishing it off then and there as it clung to its last bits of life. "Give me just a second." Maybe I can actually make this a bit quicker and easier on all of us. It was only the one, and it was still entombed in the stone Thera had crushed it with, meaning he wasn't too scared of another attack. But he still stood as far back as he could before making his attempt as he connected to the demon's mind and reached back into its memories. There was nothing pleasant about reaching into the mind of a dying beast, feeling the pain of its crushed body or its desperate struggle for life. But Ben pushed that away as well as he could to focus on what really mattered, touching the monster's memories to learn its history, wanting to find whatever he could with whatever time it had left. He could feel it wasn't long, so he threw himself in, seeing its most recent experiences and the feelings that came with it, so much dirt as it burrowed through the earth, the feeling of a call, an order, both making it want to keep the land clear while joining up with others, both keeping it in that area as it dug down ever deeper to the cavern below. Damn. He was seeing hundreds of them in its memories, swarming the vast space as bodies climbed over one another to get in and out, along with the subtle force keeping them all in line just enough that they wouldn't kill each other, even if the instinct was still there. How a species so filled with an innate bloodlust could have conquered the stars would always be a mystery to him, but he ignored it and kept probing, wanting to find whatever it was that was keeping them all in line and coming up short. Damn it, okay, if I can't see that, then maybe if I just keep going back farther. He could feel the beast growing weaker with each moment as he went farther back, seeing its travels through the forest, its escape from those who hunted it until it found traces of its kind, working back farther till he got to it coming out of the gate it had come through, feeling it tearing through people in its rush until he was finally back far enough to go past that interstellar gate network. Since he was limited to the memories of a creature that in that stage of its life was really no more than a wild animal, he hadn't been able to take in the surroundings to the extent he would have liked. He could tell the gate was operating on different principles compared to the one his world had, but it was hard to tell beyond a series of fractals and splits passing by faster than the demon that had traveled through it could be bothered to process. It only cared about getting to its destination. But let's see what was before it for myself, shall we? After watching the thing's life in reverse order, he was finally about to see where it had come from and braced himself for the reveal, unable to deny his interest in the world these things called home, only to be unable to take in any of it the moment he got there for the feeling it contained. A violent, oppressive force that had weighed on the demon right until the creature had passed through the gate, making it hard to move or breathe as it struggled to fight the feeling enough to keep itself alive and functional. A small part of Ben that wasn't being crushed by the experience was able to pick up on the sheer number of others around it, but not much else. Nothing to denote any real level of civilization from the sapient members of its race. Only a desolate landscape that was filled with the strange bodies of its kind. He wanted to take in more, wanted to understand it on a deeper level, to push back even farther into its memories to see whatever he could, but felt it slipping further and further away. He wasn't going to give up, wrapping his minds with the beast to make the connection stronger, wanting to see what that oppressive feeling could possibly be, but came up short. As the last dregs of life left it, the demon died, breaking the connection with it. Damn! It was his first time feeling anything bigger than a bug die while he was connected to it, especially at such a deep level, and the experience was violent. There was a sense of loss he'd never expected before that left him shivering, everything he had reeling from it as he tried to get himself in order, raising a hand to try and reassure the other two that he was fine despite how it may have looked before he moved to give them an update. Okay, so bad news. Being connected to something that's able to form complex thoughts when it dies sucks a lot more than I expected. Slightly worse news. It looks like there's a cave system beneath us with hundreds of demons currently chilling in it, with these 5 coming up to act as a mix of guards and gatherers. I suggest we figure out what we're doing from here in the safety of the cart so we can make a quick escape if we have to. He was already in the process of dragging them as he was explaining, but once the words were out, Verbum needed no extra motivation. Instead, Ben had to hang on to him to keep the guy from running too far ahead when there was a risk of danger all around them. In only seconds they had hopped into it and were floating high above the treetops, each of them wanting as much distance as they could get for whatever safety it might mean. Both Ben and Thera clearly remembered the invasion. Even if being near hundreds was technically on a much smaller scale, it was far from comforting. Okay, so the obvious question is how we're handling this. Ben sighed, debating if he should refill his mana by stealing from Thera now that she was within range, or let it refill naturally for the sake of his growth. I'm pretty sure the 5 we saw were being marginally controlled by something, so there's a non-zero chance that it'll be noticed if they don't come back. So do we leave to get help and risk them running off or handle this ourselves here and now? Leave. We obviously leave. Verbum yelled at him from the back. How the hell would we even be supposed to fight hundreds of demons by ourselves? You both can come back with whatever group is sent out here and get yourselves killed with them if you want to so badly, but don't go dragging me into it too. Even if it was coming from an entirely personal position, he had a point. They were there to guard him. Neither Ben nor Thera could reasonably justify putting him in danger by launching any sort of attack that might put him in harm's way. But on the other hand, doing nothing could be nothing more than delaying any sort of harm, which Thera decided to make clear. This is one of the largest groups I've heard about since the wave, she told them. And if Ben's right and something's controlling them, do you really want to do nothing? Yes. Even if that could just be pushing any danger just farther down the line? She sighed, beyond tired of Verbum's attitude by this point. What if the group just keeps growing larger? Hell, what if they start acting to actually hinder the war effort? The world is a big place. They could do a lot of severe damage before any armies could get to them. Hell, they could actively destroy entire towns and cities. Doing nothing when we know they're here is beyond irresponsible and the sort of thing that would lose you any respect you might have for the skill you possess. So unless you want your life to get worse and to risk putting the entire planet in a worse place, I vote we actually do something. She was looking at Verbum with eyes cold enough to make him want to shrink away, even if he still put up his meager resistance. Humph. That's easy to say. But how the hell would you both even do anything? I don't care if you're both rank 1. This is too much. Verbum, my guy, Ben started, putting on a confident grin. You can't have your skill doing all of your thinking for you. What we'd be doing is the easy bit, so just watch. I'll keep you safe while Thera destroys the forest.